She woke up not knowing her own name, but the ring on her finger knew everything. A woman opens her eyes in a hospital room and finds a stranger asleep beside her bed. A man built like violence, scarred like survival, and dressed like power. Everyone tells her the same thing: that man is her husband, that she married him 3 weeks before the accident, that she said yes to one of the most feared men alive. She remembers none of it, not one single day. If you've ever loved someone you were terrified to trust, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The first thing Avery Quinn felt was the ceiling, white, flat, humming with fluorescent light that had no business being that aggressive at whatever hour it was. She stared at it long enough that the texture started to move, tiny bumps and shadows shifting like something alive. And then her brain caught up with her eyes, and she understood she was lying down, that there was a pillow beneath her head and a thin hospital blanket pulled to her chest, and that every single muscle in her body felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. She tried to sit up. The pain that shot through her left shoulder was immediate and specific and deeply personal, like something inside her had filed a formal complaint. She dropped back against the pillow and breathed through her teeth and waited for the white spots to clear from her vision. When they did, she became aware of two things at almost exactly the same moment. The first was the ring on her left hand. It was sitting right there on her finger, heavy, platinum, set with a stone that caught the ugly fluorescent light and turned it into something that didn't belong in this room. She stared at it the way you'd stare at a word you'd read 100 times and suddenly couldn't make sense of. The second thing was the man. He was sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, slouched forward with his elbows on his knees and his chin dropped to his chest. Asleep, or something close to it. A black suit jacket hung over the back of the chair like it had been removed at some point and forgotten. The shirt beneath it was dark, unbuttoned at the collar, and the tattoos that disappeared beneath that collar were not subtle. Thick black lines, geometric and deliberate, climbing the left side of his neck. There was a scar along his jaw. Not deep, but unmistakable. A thin white line that had been there long enough to settle into permanence. His hands were folded loosely between his knees. They were not gentle hands. They were large and scarred, and held the particular stillness of something that had learned how to stay very, very quiet. Avery looked at the ring, then at the man, then at the ring again. She had absolutely no idea who he was. The door opened before she could finish processing that information, and a nurse came in moving fast with a chart in her hands and a pen tucked behind one ear, and she nearly walked right past the bed before she registered that Avery's eyes were open. She stopped. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then she gripped the chart with both hands and said, "Oh, you're awake." "Apparently," Avery said. Her voice came out wrong, thin and papery like it hadn't been used in a long time. "What happened?" The nurse was already moving, pressing the call button, reaching for the light above the bed, doing 3 things at once with the efficient energy of someone who needed to follow a protocol. "You were in an accident, a car accident, 7 weeks ago." 7 weeks. Avery heard the words and felt them land somewhere outside of herself, like they'd been thrown at a wall and stuck there instead of reaching her. 7 weeks, she said. You've been in a coma." The nurse's voice was carefully measured. Not cold, just controlled. "Mrs. Kang, there are going to be a lot of questions." "Mrs. Kang," Avery repeated. The nurse glanced at her, then glanced at the man still asleep in the chair, then back at Avery with an expression that contained entire volumes of things she was professionally prevented from saying. "Your husband," she said. "He's been here every night." Avery looked at the man again. He hadn't moved. His breathing was slow and even. "Who is he?" she said. The nurse's pen stopped moving. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Avery stopped. She pressed her lips together and tried to organize what she was feeling into something that made sense. "I mean, I don't know him. I don't recognize him. I don't remember him. I don't remember—" She stopped again because the list was getting longer as she searched for the edges of it and couldn't find any. "I don't remember anything about any of this. The accident, the hospital, him." She looked at the ring. "This." The silence in the room shifted. The nurse said very carefully, "I'll go get the doctor." She left quickly. The door closed with a soft click. And then it was just Avery and the ring and the man and the brutal fluorescent light. And somewhere outside the window, a city was making the particular kind of noise that cities make at hours they shouldn't be awake. She was still staring at him when he woke up. It happened suddenly. One moment he was completely still, and the next he was alert. No gradual blinking or disoriented stretching, just immediate awareness snapping into place like a switch being thrown. His head came up. His eyes found her immediately. They were dark. Not soft dark. Watchful dark. The way the eyes of someone who has learned to track threats in their peripheral vision tend to look even when the threat is nothing more than a woman in a hospital bed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're awake." "Apparently," Avery said again, which seemed to be the only word she had left. He reached for his jacket on the back of the chair and stood up. And standing up, he was significantly larger than sitting down, broader through the shoulders, taller than she'd expected, carrying himself with a quality that wasn't aggression exactly, but was adjacent to it. Like a man who moved through rooms knowing what would happen if anyone tried to stop him. He took a step toward the bed and she felt her body go rigid before she'd made the decision to do it. Just an involuntary signal from some animal part of her brain that said large, unknown quantity approaching, and he must have seen it because he stopped. "I'm not going to—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. He took a step back. "Never mind." She said, "The nurse said you're my husband." "Yes." "She called me Mrs. Kang." "That's your name. Legally." "My name is Avery Quinn. Avery Quinn Kang." She looked at the ring again. She looked at him. "I don't remember you," she said. And it came out sounding like an accusation, which wasn't what she intended, but he didn't flinch. "I know," he said. "I don't remember any of it. The wedding, whatever came before the wedding. I don't—" She pressed her fingertips to her temple, because the searching was starting to produce a specific kind of headache, the kind that meant the brain was trying to access files that had been corrupted. "I remember my apartment. I remember my students. I remember the community center where I teach. I remember—" She named her whole small life out loud. The leaking roof and the old piano and the 13-year-old girl who'd been learning Chopin for 2 years and still rushed the tempo. She remembered all of it. "And then I don't remember anything after August. And now apparently it's November," he said. "3rd. 3 months. More than 3 months of her life had simply stopped being accessible. She said, "How long were we married before the accident?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She stared at him. "And before that?" 8 months. She did the math without wanting to. Almost a year of knowing this man, and she had nothing. Not a fragment. Not an echo. "What's your name?" she said. Something in his jaw tightened. Not much. Barely visible. But she noticed it. "Kang Ji-hoon." She said it back to herself silently, testing its shape, waiting to feel something. She felt nothing. He said, "You don't have to be afraid of me." "I'm not afraid," she said immediately, which was partially true. "You look afraid." "I'm confused. There's a difference." He looked at her for another long moment with those dark, watchful eyes, and she had the strange sensation of being assessed, not in a threatening way, but with a thoroughness that suggested he was accustomed to reading people quickly and filing what he found. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll get the doctor." He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and didn't turn around. "You remembered the girl?" he said. "The one who rushes the Chopin." Avery stared at his back. "Mira," he said. "Her name is Mira. She's 12 now. Her birthday was 2 weeks ago." He paused. "You were upset when you realized you were going to miss it." He left before she could say anything. Avery sat in the silence and looked at the ring on her finger and felt the first real tremor of something that wasn't confusion move through her. Not fear, not grief. Something worse. The terrible slow creep of realizing there was an entire version of herself she couldn't find. The doctor who came in was a compact Korean woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of calm that came from explaining difficult things to difficult people for 30 years. She sat down instead of standing, which Avery appreciated. She explained what had happened in clear, measured language. Traumatic brain injury from the accident, extended unconsciousness. And what she was describing was a specific type of amnesia, retrograde, targeting the months immediately preceding the event. How much of it comes back? Avery asked. The doctor didn't rush the answer. In some cases, most of it. In others, selective portions. In some cases, the gap remains permanent. Permanent. The word sat in the room like a piece of furniture no one had agreed to own. What do I do in the meantime? Right now, you focus on physical recovery. The neurological monitoring continues. Your team will speak with you about psychological support as well. She paused. You may find that certain triggers, familiar environments, music, sensory details, prompt flashes of memory that are disorienting. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're getting worse. And him? Avery said. My husband. The doctor's professional calm held perfectly. Mr. Kang has been present every night since you were admitted. He's coordinated your care, liaised with specialists, and made himself available to the medical team on a 24-hour basis. She paused. He has asked for very little in return. Avery filed that away in the small compartment she was building for things she didn't know what to do with yet. Thank you, she said. After the doctor left, Ji-hoon came back in. He stayed near the door. He'd put his jacket back on, which seemed like the kind of detail that meant something. A reestablishment of distance, a professional composure reassembled. He looked like a man who had practiced looking like nothing was wrong for so many years, it had become structural. You can sit down, Avery said. He did, in the same chair, the same position, elbows on knees. She looked at his hands again, that scar on his jaw, the tattoos. She said, What do you do? The pause that followed was very short. Business. What kind? Various kinds. She looked at him steadily. You know I'm going to find out. I know. So. He met her eyes. There was no performance in it, no attempt to manage or soften. My family runs an organization. There are legitimate businesses on one side of it, and there are other operations on the other side. Criminal operations. He didn't blink. Some people use that word. Do you have a better one? Not one I use with people I'm trying to impress. She didn't know if that was supposed to be a joke. His expression didn't help her decide. She said, And I knew this when I married you. Yes. And I said yes anyway. You did. She looked down at the ring, the stone caught the light, and threw it back. Did anyone threaten you into saying yes? He asked. His voice was completely flat when he said it, like a man asking a procedural question. I'm asking if anyone forced you. I'm asking if anyone forced you. She looked up. Why would someone do that? Something shifted in his jaw again. My world is not... He stopped, started again. The people around me are not gentle, and I had... Another pause. Longer. I had reasons to worry. She held his gaze. He held hers. I don't think anyone forced me, she said finally, but I honestly don't know. I don't remember any of it. He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already prepared himself for. Then we start from where we are, he said. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she said, okay. They discharged her 8 days later. During those 8 days, various things happened. Neurological tests, speech assessments. A specialist from Seoul who flew in and spoke to her for 4 hours about the architecture of traumatic memory and left her with a headache and a reading list. 2 conversations with a psychiatrist who had kind eyes and the professional habit of asking questions that contained the answers. A brief visit from a woman named Hannah who introduced herself as Avery's best friend, whose reaction to seeing Avery awake was to burst into tears and then immediately apologize for bursting into tears, who sat beside the bed and told Avery fragments of herself. The community center, the students, the Saturday morning habit of coffee from the bad cart outside the subway station, and the Sunday habit of the farmer's market where she always bought too many apples. How did we meet? Avery asked. Him and me. Hannah, who was small and sharp-eyed and moved her hands constantly when she talked, seemed to measure something. You can ask him. I'm asking you. I know. She twisted the strap of her bag. He came to the center. His organization donated to the center, and then he came to see what it was, and you were there, and... She stopped. And what? Hannah smiled slightly. And you told him the piano was out of tune. Avery waited. He came back, Hannah said, with a piano tuner, and then he kept coming back. Avery tried to feel something in that. Some echo, some flicker. Nothing. Ji-hoon himself came every day. He didn't stay long. He didn't try to flood her with information or paper her with evidence of who they'd been. He sat in the chair. He answered what she asked. He brought her tea on the third day, without asking, in a thermos from somewhere that was not the hospital cafeteria, and she was so surprised by the quality of it that she didn't say anything for a moment. "How do I take it?" she said finally. "Small amount of honey. No milk." She looked at the thermos. "How long did it take you to learn that?" "Longer than it should have," he said. "You kept telling me regular tea was fine." She didn't know how to hold that. So she drank the tea and looked out the window at the city and didn't say anything else. On the last night before discharge, she woke up at 2 in the morning from a dream she couldn't hold and found him awake in the chair, not asleep, just sitting in the dark with his hands folded and looking at the window. He didn't know she was watching, or maybe he did and didn't care. She said, "Do you always stay this late?" He turned. "Yes." "You don't have to." "I know. You have other—" She stopped, because she didn't know what his other things were exactly. She was only understanding them in outline. "People must need you elsewhere." He looked at her for a moment. "There's nowhere I need to be," he said, "more than here." She lay in the dark after that and stared at the ceiling and felt the ring on her finger like a question mark pressed against her skin. The estate was outside the city by 40 minutes, which felt like it was designed to be. You drove through gates that required 3 separate clearances and passed men in dark jackets who stood in positions that were not casual, and then the driveway turned and there it was. A building that the word mansion technically described, but failed to capture because the word mansion suggested a certain kind of American domestic scale, and this was something else. This was architecture designed to project permanence, stone and glass and levels wide enough to hold its own weather. The car stopped and Ji-hoon was around to her side of the door before she'd gotten her bearings. Not touching her, just available. Positioned in a way that meant he was ready if she needed it. She didn't take his arm. She got out on her own. A woman was waiting at the entrance, late 50s, hair cut in a severe line, the kind of posture that doesn't come from good breeding so much as from a lifelong habit of establishing that no one in the room occupied a higher position than she did. Her suit was impeccable. Her expression was the particular kind of pleasant that is worse than unfriendly. "Mrs. Kang," she said. "Welcome home," Ji-hoon said without looking at the woman. "Madame Seo." There was a great deal of information in the way those 2 words landed. Avery filed it. "I'm Seo Min Jae," the woman said. "Ji-hoon's aunt. I manage the organization's financial interests." A pause. "Among other things." "Nice to meet you," Avery said, because that seemed like the right place to start. "You look well," Madame Seo said, in a voice that implied she had expected worse, or perhaps was reserving judgment on the matter. Her eyes moved over Avery with an efficiency that was almost clinical. "Rest is what you need. I've arranged for the guest staff to assist with whatever—" "She knows where her room is," Ji-hoon said. A pause. Madame Seo smiled. It was a precise expression. "Of course," she said. "Forgive me." Inside, Avery moved slowly through rooms that were unfamiliar and somehow not, the way a word in another language will occasionally catch a meaning your brain half knows. There was a coat hanging by the back door, gray, worn at the elbows, clearly hers, and when her hand touched the sleeve without thinking, she felt a flash of something so quick she couldn't name it before it was gone. There was a piano room. She stopped in the doorway and just stood there, because it was not incidental, not decorative. It was a room built for someone who actually played. Good instrument, proper acoustics, a chair pulled out from the bench at an angle that suggested someone had sat there recently and hadn't straightened it. Music on the stand, half-penciled with fingering notes in handwriting that was recognizably hers. "I had the room built," Ji-hoon said from behind her, "about 3 months before the wedding." She didn't say anything. "You weren't supposed to know about it until we moved in," he said. "You found out because a delivery driver gave you the confirmation code by accident." He stopped. "You cried." She turned around. Good crying or bad crying? His expression shifted into something she hadn't seen on him yet. I had never seen anyone cry about a room before, he said. I didn't know which kind to call it. She turned back to the piano and sat down on the bench and put her hands on the keys. She didn't play. She just sat with them there, feeling the cool resistance of the ivory, and waited to see if anything came. Nothing did, but her fingers remembered something. Not a specific piece, not a melody, just the position. The particular angle of the wrists, the weight distribution across the knuckles. Her body knew this bench, even if her brain didn't. The first week at the estate was an education in things she hadn't known she needed to learn. She learned the geography of the place, which hallways connected to which wings, which doors required key codes, where the kitchen was, and that the chef arrived at 6 and left at 3, and that the security shifts changed at midnight and noon. She learned that there were always a minimum of 4 armed men visible on the property, and significantly more who were not visible. She learned that she had, apparently, made a habit of taking tea in the small sitting room off the library in the mornings, because 3 different staff members directed her there as a default when she seemed to be looking for somewhere to settle. She learned that Madame Seo Min-jae appeared twice a day, once in the morning and once in the late afternoon, and that these appearances were always announced and always purposeful and always, in some way that was difficult to quantify, aimed at Avery. It wasn't overt. Nothing Madame Seo did was overt. She said things like, "You must be overwhelmed," and "A woman in your position has so much to adjust to," and "Of course Ji-hoon would want you comfortable," and each sentence was technically supportive, and each sentence left a small bruise. On the 4th day, she sat across from Avery in the sitting room with tea she had asked the kitchen to prepare and said, "I hope you understand that Ji-hoon's world is very different from the one you came from." "I'm aware," Avery said. "He has obligations, relationships that precede your marriage by decades, alliances that must be maintained." She set down her cup. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because the women who come into this family, and there have been women, though none who stayed, tend to struggle with the particular nature of what they've agreed to." "What is it I've agreed to exactly?" Madame Seo's smile was small and perfectly shaped. "That is precisely what I'm uncertain you know," she said, "given the circumstances." The implications of those 3 words, "given the circumstances," hung in the air between them. Avery looked at her steadily. "I appreciate your concern," she said, and her voice came out more level than she felt, which she was grateful for. That night, Ji-hoon came to find her in the piano room where she'd been sitting without playing for the better part of an hour. "My aunt spoke with you today," he said. Not a question. "She did." "What did she say?" Avery looked at him. "She said women who come into your family tend to struggle, and that she's uncertain I know what I agreed to." She paused. "She's not wrong about the second part." Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her and looked out at the lit perimeter of the grounds. "Min-jae runs the financial side of the organization," he said. "She's done it for 20 years. She's effective, and she is loyal to the family in a way that is not always comfortable for the people around her." "Is she loyal to you?" "She is loyal to what she believes is best for the family, which is usually me." He turned. "Not always. What does she think about me?" "She thinks," he said slowly, "that I made an emotional decision." "Did you?" He looked at her. In the half-dark of the piano room, with the night pressed against the windows, the scar on his jaw caught the light differently. "No," he said. "I made the only decision I could live with. There's a difference." She filed that away too, with the tea, with the piano room, with the girl who rushed the Chopin. She said, "Tell me something true about us." He looked at her for a long moment. "The first time I came to the art center," he said, "you were arguing with the landlord over the phone about a roof leak. You had a bucket in the hallway and a kid painting around it. You looked—" He stopped. "You looked completely calm about all of it." "And?" "And you saw me standing at the door, and you put the landlord on hold, and you said, 'Are you lost?' And when I said no, you said, 'Then you can hold the bucket.'" Avery blinked. "You went back to the call," he said. "I held the bucket." She didn't know what to say, so she said, "Was the landlord useful?" "No." "Did the roof get fixed?" "Eventually." She turned back to the piano and put her hands back on the keys, and this time, without deciding to, she began to play. Simple scales first, then something longer. A piece she couldn't name consciously, but apparently knew in her hands. A melody that moved through her fingers before her brain caught up with it. Jihoon didn't leave. He sat down in the chair in the corner, the one she'd been using, and he listened, and she played, and neither of them spoke. When she stopped, the room held the last note for a second before it faded. "What was that?" she said. "Something you played on the first night you stayed here," he said. "I don't know what it's called. You didn't tell me." She sat with that. Her hand still rested on the keys. "I don't know the name of it either," she said. "I just know it. Tisim." The second week brought the first nightmare. She woke up from it gasping, heart hammering, a sensation of glass and impact, and then nothing, white, absolute nothing, that faded even as she tried to hold it. The room was dark. Her shoulder ached. She lay still and breathed and waited for her pulse to slow. There was a light under the door to the hallway. She got up without thinking about it too carefully, crossed the room, opened the door. Jihoon was at the end of the corridor, not near her door. The other end, 50 feet away, standing by the window with a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in Korean, low and rapid, and whatever the conversation was, it was not casual. He turned when he heard her. He held up one finger. "Wait." She waited. He finished the call and walked toward her, and she noticed, in a way she hadn't been positioned to notice before, that he was not the same at 2 in the morning as he was during the day. The jacket was gone. The formal posture was gone. He was wearing dark clothes that were not his office clothes. And there was something about his face in this light, without the controlled professional surface, that was considerably more human. "Are you all right?" he said when he reached her. "Bad dream," she said. "About the accident." He didn't try to talk her through it or offer structured comfort. He simply stayed where he was, close enough that his presence was a fact, and waited. "Who were you on the phone with?" she said. "Someone who works for me." "At 2 in the morning. My business doesn't keep business hours." She leaned against the wall. He stood a few feet away. The hallway was quiet except for the distant sound of the perimeter, a door somewhere below, the ordinary breathing of a large building at night. "Does it ever end?" she said. "The phone calls?" She gestured vaguely at everything. "This. All of it." He considered the question with the seriousness she was starting to understand was his default. He didn't give her comfortable answers. "No," he said, "but it becomes the background, the way traffic becomes the background." A pause. "You told me that, actually, about the city. You grew up in the city. You said at some point you stopped hearing it." She closed her eyes, pressed the back of her head against the wall. "I keep trying to remember," she said, "and it's like there's a room and I know where the door is, but I don't have the key." He was quiet. "It's frustrating," she said, "knowing something is there and not being able to—" "I know." She opened her eyes. He was watching her with the same watchful, dark expression she'd seen in the hospital, but underneath it, this time, she could see what it cost him to hold it steady. "It's not easy for you either," she said. He didn't deny it. "No. Do you want me to remember, or do you want me to—" She stopped. "What do you want?" A long pause. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I want you to be safe," he said. "After that, I want you to be well. After that, I want—" He stopped. The fraction of him that had almost appeared retreated. "The rest can wait," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Okay," she said. Same word she'd said in the hospital, same lack of full certainty in it, but meaning something slightly different now. She went back to her room. She didn't fall back asleep easily, but it wasn't the nightmare keeping her awake anymore. It was the image of him standing at the end of that hallway at 2 in the morning with a phone to his ear, managing an empire, and still turning immediately when he heard her open a door. 3 days later, she found Hana waiting in the sitting room with 3 boxes and the expression of someone who has been given a task and intends to complete it responsibly. "What is this?" Avery said. "Your stuff," Hana said. "From your apartment. Ji-hoon said you might want it. I figured you could go through it with me instead of by yourself." They spent the afternoon on the floor of the sitting room, going through the boxes. Clothes, books, A ceramic mug from the Arts Center with a chip on the handle. Photographs. Some of Hannah and Avery that made Hannah laugh, and Avery look at carefully, searching faces she recognized in her own history without feeling them land. Near the bottom of the second box, under a folded sweater, was an envelope. Avery pulled it out. Her name was on the front in her own handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. A note. 4 lines. You're going to want to run. You're going to find 100 reasons why this makes no sense. I know, because I was you 6 months ago, and I almost did. Don't. She read it twice. 3 times. She turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. Hannah, who had been watching her, said, "What is that?" "A note," Avery said. "In my handwriting." Hannah was quiet for a second. "Like, from you to you?" "Apparently." Avery looked at the paper again. "I wrote a note to my future self." Hannah reached over and took the paper carefully and read it. She handed it back without saying anything for a long time. "You were worried," she said finally. "Before the wedding. Not about him. I don't think about him. You were worried about you. About whether you'd lose yourself in all of—" She gestured with a delicacy that was unusual for her, at the walls of the room, at the life they represented. "Did I?" Avery said. "Lose myself?" Hannah looked at her steadily. "I don't think so," she said. "But I think you were terrified you would." Avery held the note, her own handwriting, her own fear preserved in 4 lines, waiting for a version of herself that would need them. "You're going to want to run." She folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. She thought about the piano room, the tea, the bucket at the beginning of everything. She thought about Ji-hoon at the end of the hallway at 2 in the morning, turning when he heard a door. She didn't want to run. She wanted answers. That was new. She was in the piano room when Madame Seo found her again. 4 days later, the older woman appeared in the doorway with the particular quality of a person who has made a decision about something. "May I?" she said, gesturing to the chair. Avery took her hands off the keys. "Of course." Madame Seo sat. She folded her hands. She looked at Avery with an expression that had shifted from the pleasant, dangerous one to something more direct. "I want to speak plainly," she said. "Please." Ji-hoon is not a complicated man at his core. He is a powerful one. Those 2 things are often confused, but they are not the same. She paused. He is also, for the first time in the decades I have known him, behaving in a way I cannot fully account for. Avery waited. "He has not," Madame Seo said carefully, "conducted himself as a man who made a strategic acquisition." The choice of words was pointed. Avery felt them go in. And what does a man making a strategic acquisition usually look like? She seemed to consider and discard several words. "He does not usually hold a bucket," she said finally. Avery went still. Madame Seo looked at her with the first genuinely complicated expression Avery had seen from her. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to reluctant honesty. "I don't know what you were to each other," she said. "I have watched this family for 30 years, and I am telling you I do not know what you were to him. That is an unusual admission for me to make." "Why are you making it?" "Because," Madame Seo said, "whatever it was not nothing, and I have—" A pause. "I have not always acted as though that were true. In the weeks before your accident." The words landed quietly. Avery held them. "I was concerned," Madame Seo said. "The nature of my concerns does not matter now. What matters is that I may have—" The pause this time was long enough to mean something. "I may have created pressure that I should not have created." Avery said, "What kind of pressure?" Madame Seo looked at the piano, then back at Avery. "The kind," she said, "that makes a woman question whether she is loved or whether she is useful." The sitting room was quiet. Avery looked at this woman who had been applying careful damage since day 1 and felt, with unexpected sharpness, the particular exhaustion of trying to map the motives of people in a world you didn't know. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I believe," Madame Seo said, "that your recovery will go better if you are not working from false information." She stood. She smoothed her jacket. The pleasant, dangerous expression was back, but underneath it, something had shifted, slightly, like a hairline fracture in very controlled stone. He is not easy to know, but I have never seen him. She stopped. He learned how you take your tea within a week, she said. It took him 9 years to learn how I take mine. I still don't believe it's intentional. She left. Avery sat at the piano for a long time after that, with her hands in her lap, and the city visible through the window, and the note in her pocket, and the ring on her finger, and the weight of a life she couldn't remember and was beginning, without meaning to, without permission, to want. She pressed one key, a single note, held it until the sound faded completely. Then she pressed it again. She found the box the following Tuesday. She had been looking for a specific book she remembered owning, a theory text she used for teaching. Going through the last unpacked box from her apartment, and under 3 folded sweaters and a stack of lesson plans was a manila folder thick with paper, with her name written on the tab in handwriting that wasn't hers. She opened it slowly. What was inside was not a book, not lesson plans, not anything she'd been looking for. The papers were financial. She understood enough to recognize that much immediately, even as the specifics required careful reading. Trust documents, transfer records, a prenuptial agreement she had apparently signed with her signature at the bottom, and an addendum dated 6 weeks before the wedding. She read for 30 minutes. When she put the folder down, her hands were not entirely steady. The art center, her art center, the building with the leaking roof and the out-of-tune piano and Mira's birthday parties and 13 years of her life, had received a funding transfer of $47 million. The date on the transfer was 3 weeks before their wedding. 3 weeks. She sat with the folder in her lap and the papers spread on the floor around her, and the afternoon light coming through the window at an angle that illuminated everything too clearly. She thought about what Madame So had said, the kind of pressure that makes a woman question whether she is loved or whether she is useful. She thought about the note she'd written to herself. You're going to want to run. She thought about $47 million changing hands before the vows. The ring on her finger felt different, heavier, less like a question and more like an answer she hadn't wanted to find. She was still sitting there when Ji-hoon's car came up the drive, visible through the window, and she watched it without moving. She heard him come in. She heard the particular sound of his footsteps, which she realized she'd learned without meaning to. The weight of him, the pace. They stopped outside the door. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He looked at her, at the papers, at the folder. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. Some small, contained shift, and she filed it away with everything else. She held up the folder. $47 million, she said, 3 weeks before the wedding. She held his gaze. Tell me what I'm looking at. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Not what you think, he said. Tell me what I'm looking at, she said again, and her voice this time was very level, the way it got when she was working very hard to keep it that way. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked into the room and crouched down across from her and picked up one of the trust documents. He turned it over. He pointed to a clause near the bottom of the second page. Read that, he said. She looked at where he was pointing. She read it. She read it again. Her throat closed. This is... She stopped. This is irrevocable. Yes. This means... She stopped again. The implications were unfolding in a direction she hadn't expected. This means neither you nor anyone in your organization can ever touch it, he said. Yes. Not for any reason. Not under any circumstances. Not if you left. Not if... He stopped. It cannot be used as leverage. It cannot be recalled. It was never mine to give and take back. He set down the paper. It was always yours. Avery looked at the documents spread around her. Why? She said. He looked at her. In the afternoon light, with the papers between them, he looked like a man who had prepared for this conversation, had known it would come, had waited for it. Because I knew what my world was, he said, and I knew what I was asking you to walk into. And I wanted... He stopped. He picked his words carefully, and she'd learned enough in the weeks since the hospital to know that when he slowed down like this, when he stopped and started again, he was being genuinely precise. I wanted you to know you could leave, always, for any reason, without losing anything I had given you. You wanted me to know I could leave, she repeated. Yes. So you made sure that if I did, I'd be safe, he said. Financially. Yes. She looked at him. Outside the window, the light was going. The city beyond the estate was starting to develop its evening silhouette. When did you... She stopped, started again. Was this your idea? Yes. Did anyone advise you against it? Something close to something moved across his face. Several people. Madame Seo. Among others. She sat with that. With the folder. With the ring. I wrote myself a note, she said. Before the wedding. It said, "Don't run." He looked at her. I think, she said slowly, that I was afraid of exactly this. That I was going to find something that looked like control and couldn't tell the difference between control and... She stopped. He waited. And this? She said, holding up the folder. I couldn't tell the difference. Or I was afraid I couldn't. She set it down. And then I found it without context. Without you telling me first. She looked at the papers. And for the last 2 hours, I've been sitting here thinking you bought me. The room was very quiet. I know, he said. You should have told me, she said. Yes. He didn't qualify it or explain it. I should have. She picked up the trust document and looked at the irrevocability clause again. She thought about the piano room, built 3 months before the wedding so she'd have somewhere to play. The tea. The bucket. The man who learned her students' names. She thought about $47 million in a trust she could access whether he lived or died or did anything in between, and the particular kind of decision it took to structure something that way. She looked at him. I need to think, she said. He stood. He picked up his jacket from where it had slid off the chair when he'd crouched down. He moved toward the door. He paused. He said without turning around, The note you wrote yourself? Did it say anything else? She looked at his back. It said I was you 6 months ago. He turned then, enough to see her face. Past tense, she said. It said I was you, as if the version who wrote it had already gotten through it. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and left. She sat in the room with the papers and the dying light and the ring and thought about a woman she couldn't remember being, who had sat down 6 months ago and been afraid enough to write a warning to herself, and brave enough to marry him anyway. The papers were still spread on the floor when Hannah called an hour later, and Avery was still sitting in the same position, but the expression on her face was different from the one that had been there when Ji-hoon walked in. Different from afraid, not yet certain, but different from afraid. She picked up the call. I need to ask you something, Hannah said immediately, which was typical. About before the accident, about the money. Avery was quiet for a beat. So do I, she said. What happened? I found the folder. A pause on Hannah's end. Okay, she said. Okay, what did it say? Avery looked at the irrevocability clause, at $47 million in an untouchable trust, at the ring on her hand catching the last of the afternoon light. It said, she stopped, because what she was realizing, slowly and against her own resistance, was that it wasn't what she'd thought. But she needed to hear it from someone else first. Someone who had watched it happen in real time and hadn't looked away. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Tell me everything you actually saw. Hannah was quiet for a second. And then, on the other end of the line, in the kind of voice people use when they're finally allowed to tell the truth about something they've been holding for too long, she began. Hannah didn't start at the beginning. She started at the part that still bothered her. The first time I met him, she said, I told you he was going to ruin your life. Avery shifted the phone to her other ear and pulled her knees up on the sitting room couch. Outside the windows, the estate had gone dark, the perimeter lights coming on one by one in a slow, automatic sequence. What did I say? You said I was being dramatic. Was I wrong? A pause. I don't know yet. Hannah's voice was doing the thing it did when she was being careful, a slight flattening of the natural rhythm, like someone walking across ice. He came to the center 3 times before you told me about him. 3 times. You kept it to yourself for almost 2 weeks. Why? I asked you that. You said, a short laugh, humorless. You said you didn't know how to explain him. Avery looked at the folder still sitting on the cushion beside her. What does that mean? It means he didn't fit any category you had. That was what scared you, that he kept showing up and he didn't want anything obvious. Hannah stopped. Men like him, the ones who come into rooms like yours, with that much money and that kind of presence, they usually want something obvious. A donation named after themselves. A photo, something. He brought a piano tuner and he sat in the back while the kids finished their lesson, and he didn't say anything to anyone. Until I noticed him. Until you noticed him. And even then you made him hold a bucket. A real laugh this time, brief and then gone. I think that's what did it, honestly. You didn't treat him like he was exceptional. You just put him to work. Avery tried to find something in that, some flicker behind the eyes. Nothing. Just the shape of a story being handed to her by someone who'd watched it happen. When did it change? She said. When did it become whatever it became? Hannah was quiet for long enough that Avery could hear her breathing, the particular held quality of it. There was a night, she said. February, late February. You called me at midnight. I could tell you'd been sitting with something for a while. You sounded like you do when you've made a decision and you're terrified of it. What did you say? I said, are you sure? And you said, she stopped. You said, I don't know if sure is even the point. You said, I just know that I keep looking for a reason to leave and I can't find one that's actually real, and that scares me more than staying. The sitting room held the words. Avery said quietly, I was already in love with him. You'd been in love with him for months, Hannah said. You were just the last one to admit it. A pause. He was not subtle about how he felt about you. He didn't push. He didn't use it. He just kept showing up. And when you finally said something to him about it, do you know what he said? No. He said he'd been waiting for you to catch up. The silence on the line stretched. Avery pressed her thumbnail into the edge of the folder. Hannah, she said, the money, the $47 million, did you know about it? A beat. Not until after. You didn't tell me about the trust until 3 days before the wedding. What was my reaction when I found out? Hannah chose her words carefully, which Avery had learned meant she was going to be honest about something uncomfortable. You were upset, she said. At first, you thought it looked like he was buying out a problem, prepaying for your silence, making it impossible for you to leave and then also impossible for you to complain about it. That's what I thought tonight. I know. I could hear it in your voice when you picked up. And then what? And then you talked to him. Hannah's voice was very steady. I don't know everything he said. You didn't tell me. But you came back different. You said it was the most uncomfortable thing you'd ever had to sit with, someone using power to protect you from their power. She stopped. You said it was like being handed a key to a door you hadn't been sure existed. Avery looked at the irrevocability clause, at the specific legal language that made $47 million permanently, irrevocably, unconditionally hers. She said, Did Madame So know about the trust? The pause this time was different, more specific. Yes, Hannah said. Did she approve? No. Hannah's voice had gone careful again. From what you told me, she was very much against it. She thought it was unnecessary. She thought her word was reckless, giving that kind of financial independence to someone who hadn't proven their commitment to the family. Someone like me. Someone like you. Avery sat with that. With Madame Sio's word. Reckless. A man building a legal structure to prevent himself from ever having leverage over his own wife, and the woman who ran his finances calling it reckless. Was she right? Avery said. From a practical standpoint, was she right to be concerned? Hannah made a sound, not quite a laugh. She was right that it was unusual. She was right that it was a risk. A pause. She was not right about why he took it. Avery closed her eyes. Okay, she said. Are you okay? I don't know. She opened her eyes. The room was the same room it had been 2 hours ago, the same lamplight and the same window and the same perimeter lights through the glass. I'm going to need some time. Take it, Hannah said. But Avery. Yeah, you wrote yourself that note for a reason. You knew you might find something that looked wrong. You knew you might... A pause. The person who wrote that note had already been through all of it. already asked all the questions, and she still said don't run. After the call, Avery sat in the quiet for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Ji-hoon. He was in the study, which she'd been in twice before, a room that surprised her every time she entered it, because it didn't look like the rest of the house. The rest of the estate was precision and control, surfaces that didn't show fingerprints, furniture chosen for what it communicated. The study was a room someone had actually used. Books pulled at angles from shelves, not arranged. A desk with papers stacked in the organized disorder of real work. A lamp that had been repaired rather than replaced. A visible seam along the base where something had cracked and been fixed. He was at the desk. He looked up when she came in. She said, "I called Hana." "I know, I heard." She looked at him. "You could hear me?" "The walls in this house are not as thick as they look," he said, and there was something in it that might have been dry, almost, if he were a different kind of man. "I didn't listen." "Okay." She came further into the room and sat in the chair across from the desk, the one that was clearly intended for exactly that use, angled slightly, worn at the arms. "She told me things. About before." He waited. "About how it started. About the night I called her in February." She paused. "About the trust. About what Madame Seo said." Something moved in his face. "What did she say?" Madame Seo said. "That the trust was reckless." He was quiet. "Was there—" Avery stopped, reorganized. "How bad was it, between you and her? About the trust." Ji-hoon leaned back in the chair. It was the first time she'd seen him make a movement that wasn't controlled. Not relaxing exactly, but letting the structure of the posture drop slightly, like something being set down after being carried too long. "She made her position very clear," he said. "She does not do things by degrees." "What did she say specifically?" "She said I was thinking with the wrong part of my anatomy." Avery blinked. "She has never been subtle," he said. "And what did you say?" "I said she was not wrong about the risk." He looked at the desk. "I said it was the right thing to do anyway." "Did she accept that?" "No." A pause. "She accepted that she couldn't stop me, which is different." Avery looked at the lamp with the repaired base. She thought about a man who fixed things rather than replaced them, in a room that was insulated from the controlled perfection of the rest of the house. And she thought about what it meant that this was the room he actually used. "I was wrong tonight," she said, "when I was sitting with those papers. I made an assumption." He didn't say anything. "I'm telling you because you should know," she said. "I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not apologizing. I'm saying I understand more now than I did 2 hours ago, and I'm still—" She stopped again, and this time it was because the thing she was trying to say was sitting in a place in her chest that was not yet all the way open. "I'm still putting it together." He looked at her steadily. "Take whatever time you need." "I know." She looked at his hands on the desk. "Ji-hoon." "Yes." "The woman I was, before, was she happy?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the desk for a moment, then up at her, and when he answered, it was with the careful precision she'd come to recognize as his version of honesty. "She was—" A pause. "She was more afraid than happy in the beginning. Then she was both. Then—" He stopped. "By the end, I thought so. I thought she was." Something moved behind his eyes. "I don't know if I was right." "You don't know if she was happy, or you don't know if you could tell." His jaw tightened. "Both," he said. She held that. "I'm going to bed," she said. She stood up. She looked at him in the lamplight, in the room he actually used, with the repaired lamp and the pulled books, and the work spread across the desk like evidence of a life more ordinary than the one the estate projected. "Thank you for not lying to me when I asked you directly." "I won't lie to you," he said. "I might—" A pause. "I might not always tell you everything immediately, but I won't lie." "That's not the same thing," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." She went to the door. She paused without turning around, the way she was noticing he sometimes did, and thought that maybe there were habits they had built together that her body remembered before her mind did. "The lamp," she said. "The one with the seam. Did I do that?" A very short silence. You knocked it off the desk, he said. About 6 weeks after we began. A pause. You were mortified. You tried to buy a replacement before I noticed. What did you do with the replacement? Gave it to someone else, he said. I like the one you broke better. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about the trust documents and the note she'd written herself, and Hannah's voice saying she still said don't run, and she thought about a man who gave away a perfectly good lamp because he preferred the one with the crack in it. She still didn't remember any of it, but she was beginning to understand why she'd stayed. Madame Co came the next morning earlier than usual. Avery was in the kitchen when she arrived, standing at the counter with a mug that was not the good tea, but the acceptable tea. The kind she made herself from the basic supplies in the cabinet because it was 7 in the morning and she hadn't yet located her preferred method of operation in this house. She heard the front door. She heard the particular quality of Madame Co's footsteps, which she had also learned without meaning to, measured, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had decided where she was going before she started walking. The kitchen doorway filled. You're up early, Madame Co said. I didn't sleep much, Avery said. Madame Co looked at the mug, at the cabinet where Avery had found the tea, at Avery herself with the expression of a woman cataloging information. I'll have the kitchen stocked with what you prefer, she said. It's fine. It is not fine. Ji-hoon would want. I said it's fine. Avery looked at her over the rim of the mug. Sit down, if you're staying. A pause. A very specific pause. The kind that meant someone was deciding whether to be insulted and concluding that this was not the moment for it. Madame Co sat at the kitchen table with the back-straight posture of someone sitting in a chair that was beneath them by choice. Avery brought her mug to the table and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Madame Co said, You found the documents. Last night. And? Avery looked at her. And I initially assumed the worst. A pause. I imagine that wasn't an accident. Something shifted in Madame Co's expression. Not guilt. She was not a woman who wore guilt, but a recalibration. The folder was packed with your belongings, she said. I had no control over what you found and when. But you knew it was there. I knew the documents existed. And you didn't mention them. It was not my place to... You have made a significant number of things your place, Avery said, since I arrived. Why not that one? The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere outside, a vehicle on the gravel drive. One of the security shift changes. Madame Co looked at the table. It was the first time Avery had seen her look anywhere but directly forward, and it had the quality of a tell, something she probably didn't usually allow. I was testing something, she said. What? Whether you would ask him. She looked up. Whether your instinct, when you found something alarming, was to leave or to confront. The words sat in the air between them. Avery said very carefully, You were testing me. I was observing. That is an extremely fine distinction. Yes, Madame Co said. It is. Avery set down her mug. She held Madame Co's gaze with the particular steadiness of a woman who has spent years managing children in the middle of difficult situations and has learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is flinch first. And what did you observe? Madame Co was quiet for a moment. Then, that you went to him. I called Hannah first, and then you went to him. She folded her hands on the table. You did not pack. You did not make arrangements. You did not call a car. A pause. You went to the study. Avery said nothing. The women who came before you, Madame Co said, and her voice had shifted into something that was almost, not soft, but less armored, left at the first real difficulty. Not because they were weak, because they were sensible, because they looked at what this family requires, and they made a reasonable calculation. She stopped. You are making an unreasonable one. Or, Avery said, I'm making a different one. Madame Co looked at her. What did you say to me? Avery said. Before the accident, you said you created pressure. What was it? The silence that followed was long. Long enough that the kitchen clock on the wall became audible, a thin mechanical tick. I told you, Madame Co said finally, that the family's stability depended on decisions that could not always account for individual sentiment. What does that mean in plain language? It means I suggested that his attachment to you was a liability. To him, to the organization. And to me? Avery kept her voice flat. Did you suggest it was a liability to me as well? Madame Seo looked at the table again. I may have implied, she said, that a woman in your position, your financial position, your background, would ultimately find the weight of this life more than she had bargained for. You told me I wasn't built for it. I suggested it. That's the same thing when you're the one saying it. Madame Seo did not deny it. Avery picked up her mug, put it down again without drinking. Was it true? I don't know. And for once, it sounded like she genuinely didn't. I have been wrong about things before. Less often than most people. But before. The sound of the front door, Ji-hoon's voice in the hallway, brief, to one of the security staff. Then footsteps. Different footsteps. Longer stride, quieter somehow. The particular quality of someone who had learned to move without announcing themselves. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He saw them both. His expression did not change, but his eyes moved between them with a speed that said he was doing significant computational work behind the stillness. Madame Seo, he said. Ji-hoon. She stood. She was dignified about it. I was just leaving. You don't have to, Avery said. Madame Seo looked at her. Something in that look was different from everything that had come before. Less measured, more exposed, and she covered it quickly, but not quite quickly enough. I have work to attend to, she said. She picked up her bag from the chair. She nodded to Avery. Mrs. Kang. She left. Her footsteps down the hallway, the front door. Ji-hoon didn't move from the doorway. He was watching Avery with the same watchful darkness she'd cataloged from the first morning in the hospital, but underneath it now she could see things she couldn't see then. The specific quality of his attention, the way he waited to take cues from her before he committed to a direction. How long have you been up? He said. Since 5. He came into the kitchen. He went to the good cabinet, the one she hadn't found, and opened it and pulled out proper tea, the kind in the thermos that first day at the hospital, and started water without asking. You don't have to. I know, he said. Sit down. She sat. He made the tea with the concentration that was disproportionate to the task. The same focus she'd seen him give the papers on his desk, the conversation with the security staff, everything. Like he did not have a setting for things that didn't matter. He set the mug in front of her. Small amount of honey. No milk. She wrapped her hands around it. She told me what she said to me, Avery said, before, that I wasn't built for it. He sat down across from her. His own coffee, black, already made. He'd had it in his hand when he came in, and she hadn't even registered it. I know what she told you. Did you know at the time? I knew she had spoken with you. I didn't know the specifics until after. After the accident. Yes. And when you found out? His hands around the coffee cup were very still. I told her, he said, that if she interfered in my marriage again, she would find her role in the organization significantly reduced. Avery looked at him. She's your aunt. Yes. She's been running your finances for 20 years. Yes. And you told her that. I told her that, he said. And I told her that what she said to you was not a business decision. It was a personal one. And she does not get to make personal decisions about my life. The kitchen was very quiet. Avery thought about the version of herself who had gone into that accident 3 weeks into a marriage, carrying whatever Madame Seo had planted in her before the vows, wondering if she was built for it, wondering if the man across from her saw her as an attachment or an asset. Did she apologize to you? Avery said. Before the accident, to you, about what she said to me? No. Did she think she'd done something wrong? His jaw shifted. She thought she'd done what was necessary. A pause. And then you were in a hospital bed, and I think... He stopped, looked at his coffee. I think she has spent 7 weeks deciding whether she regrets it. Do you think she does? He looked up. This morning is the first time she has come here without being asked, he said. In 7 weeks. She came twice during your hospitalization, and both times I called her first. He paused. Draw your own conclusions. Avery looked at the mug in her hands. The good tea, the honey. I'm going to the Arts Center today, she said. I want to see it. A pause. I'll arrange. I want to go by myself. She looked at him. With a driver. And I understand why there will be security, but I need to see it on my own terms, without anyone managing my reaction to it. He held her gaze. She could see him wanting to qualify it, to add conditions, to do the thing his world had trained him to do, which was to control variables. She watched him choose not to. Okay, he said. Thank you. The driver will give you his number. You call when you're ready to come back. I know how cars work, she said. I know you do. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite, but close to it. She drank the tea. The Arts Center looked the same. That was the first thing. The stupid, overwhelming first thing that hit her when she got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building. It looked exactly the same as the version she had been carrying in her memory. The same brick, the same painted sign with a slightly uneven lettering on the second S, the same narrow windows on the upper floor. It looked like somewhere she had been 10,000 times, because she had. She went in. The woman at the front desk was named Carla, and she had worked there for 6 years, and she stopped moving entirely when Avery walked through the door, and then she came around the desk and hugged her hard enough that Avery's shoulder reminded her it had recently been injured. You look... Carla pulled back and looked at her. You look like yourself. I feel like myself, Avery said. Mostly. The kids are going to lose their minds when they hear you came in. Don't tell them yet. Avery looked around. The hallway with the practice room doors, the bulletin board with the performance schedule, a poster for the winter recital with the date already printed. I just want to walk around for a minute. Carla understood things without needing them, explained. That was one of the qualities Avery could feel herself remembering. Not the specific memories, but the truth of the person, how she operated. Take whatever time you need, she said. I'll keep everyone out of the main hall. Avery walked through the building slowly. The practice room, smelling of rosin and old carpet. The supply closet with the broken handle that was supposed to be fixed in March and hadn't been touched. The hallway where the students kept their instrument cases in a long row of cubbies that were perpetually overcrowded. The main hall. She stood in the doorway of it and felt the particular quality of an empty performance space. The way it held potential, the acoustic difference of a room designed to carry sound, the specific hush of a space waiting to be used. The piano on the stage was not the one from the estate. It was older, more worn, a few keys that didn't quite behave. She went to it. She sat down. She played the same thing she'd played at the estate, the unnamed thing her hands knew. In this room, in this acoustic, it sounded different, rounder, more present, like it was meant to be played here. When she stopped, someone said, "That's the song you play when you're trying to figure something out." She turned. A girl was standing in the stage door, 12 years old, small for her age, with the kind of solemn expression that children wear when they're trying to be taken seriously. Dark coat, violin case in her hand. Mira. Avery felt something shift in her chest. Not a memory exactly. Recognition. The recognition of someone you know so well, their presence rearranges the air. "Hi," Avery said. "Hi." Mira came in, carefully, like she was trying not to startle something. "Carla said not to come in here, but I looked through the window in the door and I could see it was you." She paused. "I'm glad you're not dead." "Me too," Avery said. Mira set her violin case down and came to stand beside the piano bench. She looked at Avery with the unguarded assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she's not looking. "Do you remember me?" "Yes," Avery said. "I remember you." Something in Mira's face that had been held very tight let go, just slightly. "Do you remember teaching me?" "I remember you. I remember your playing." She paused. "I missed your birthday." "It's okay. It's not." She looked at the girl. "What did you do?" "My mom made a cake. Some of my friends came." A pause. "Mr. Kang sent flowers." "Which was—" She made a face. "And it was nice, but it was also kind of a lot." Avery looked at the piano keys for a second. Did he come? No, just the flowers. Mira picked at a thread on her coat sleeve. He called, though, talked to my mom for like 20 minutes. I think he asked how I was doing. Avery held that. He came to the recital in September, Mira said. Before everything. He sat in the back. He always sits in the back. She paused. He claps, though, like a normal amount. Good to know, Avery said. Are you going to be okay? Mira said. And the way she said it, direct, no softening, the particular honesty of a child who understands that adults will say fine without meaning it, made something in Avery's chest pull sharp. I think so, she said. I'm still working on it. Mira nodded. She picked up her violin case. She looked at Avery one more time with those serious eyes. You didn't rush the tempo, she said. Just now. You never rush. She left. Avery sat at the piano for a long time after that. She thought about $47 million in a trust. She thought about a man who called a 12-year-old girl's mother and asked how she was doing. She thought about Hannah's voice saying she still said don't run, and Madame Sio's voice saying a woman in your position, and her own handwriting on a piece of paper saying I was you, 6 months ago. She pressed a key, held it. She had come here to feel something she recognized. She felt it. She was in the car on the way back to the estate, half an hour out, the city giving way to the particular quiet of the road beyond it, when her phone buzzed. Not a call. A message. From a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. There was no text. Just a photograph. She looked at the photograph for a long time. It was a document. Financial. Official letterhead at the top, the kind that came from a law firm she didn't recognize. A date at the top that was 2 weeks before the wedding. She could read most of it, even in the photograph. What she could read told her that 3 weeks before their wedding, a transfer had been arranged. Not the Arts Center Trust, a different one, a separate account. In her name. Not 47 million. More. Significantly more. And beneath the financial language, a handwritten note. 3 sentences. Signed with a name she recognized. Madame Seo Min-jae. The handwritten note said, "This is what your silence is worth to the organization. The Arts Center has been handled. You understand what this means." Avery read it once. She read it again. She sat in the back of the car with the city lights beginning behind her and the dark road ahead and the photograph of a document that suggested, that more than suggested, that said directly, that someone had tried to pay her to stay quiet. Not Ji-hoon. She turned the phone over in her hands. Turned it back. Looked at the photograph again. The number that had sent it was already disconnected. She tried calling back and got nothing. She thought about Madame Seo in the kitchen that morning. I was testing something, whether your instinct was to leave or to confront. She thought about Madame Seo at the hospital 2 days after she woke up, precise and pleasant and full of careful damage. She thought about a financial document signed 2 weeks before her wedding with a woman's name at the bottom. And she understood, with a clarity that settled in her chest like something cold, that she did not yet know what she had agreed to. She thought she'd been beginning to. She was wrong. The car moved through the dark. The estate gates were already visible at the end of the road, lit and waiting. She put the phone in her pocket. Her hands were not steady. She left them in her lap anyway, and looked at the gates coming closer, and thought about a man who fixed lamps instead of replacing them, and a woman who might have bought her silence before the wedding began, and understood that she was about to walk into a house where both of them lived. And she had no idea yet which version of the truth was the right one. The gates opened automatically when the car reached them. Avery watched them swing wide through the windshield and felt the movement in her stomach the way she'd been feeling things since the photograph arrived. Not in her chest, not in her head, but lower, in the place where the body keeps its most honest reactions. She had not called Ji-hoon. She had not called Hannah. She had sat in the back of the car for 30 minutes with the phone in her pocket and her hands in her lap and done nothing except breathe and think and try to build a framework for what she was looking at that didn't collapse the moment she pressed on it. She couldn't. The car stopped at the entrance. The driver, a quiet man named Park, who had worked for the estate for 11 years, she'd learned, and communicated primarily in single syllables and small functional gestures, came around to her door. She got out without help. She thanked him. She stood on the steps and looked at the house. All the lights were on. That was unusual. Usually by this hour the upper floors went dark and only the working rooms stayed lit. Tonight the whole building was awake. She went inside. Ji-hoon was in the main hallway, standing with two men she had seen before. Security, senior level, the kind who stayed close rather than patrolling the perimeter. The conversation stopped the moment she walked through the door. All three of them looked at her, and the quality of the looking was different from what she'd walked into before. Something had happened. "What's wrong?" she said. Ji-hoon crossed the hallway to her in 4 strides. He looked at her face first, then at her hands, then back at her face, the rapid assessment of someone checking for damage. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. What happened?" "When did you last look at your phone?" She thought about the photograph, the disconnected number. "In the car," she said. "Why?" He took her arm, not rough, but deliberate, and moved her away from the two men into the side corridor. His hand dropped when they were out of sight. He turned to face her. "Someone sent a message to 3 members of the organization tonight," he said. "Financial documents, with a note attached." Her stomach went completely still. "What kind of documents?" she said. "Sheets." He looked at her. "Premarital transfer records. A private account established in your name 2 weeks before the wedding." A pause. "With a handwritten note signed by Madame Seo." She pulled the phone from her pocket and held it out to him without saying anything. He looked at the screen, at the photograph. He took the phone from her hand and looked at it for a long time. "Someone sent it to you," he said. 30 minutes ago. Numbers disconnected." He turned the phone over, turned it back. His face was doing the thing where all the control was so total it became its own kind of expression, a blankness that meant the opposite of nothing. "You didn't call me," he said. "I needed 30 minutes." He looked at her. "To decide what?" "To decide," she said, "whether to come back." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the house, a door closed, the security shift doing its rotation. Ji-hoon said, "I came back," she said, "but I need you to tell me what that document is, in plain language, without managing the way you tell me." He was quiet for 3 seconds. She was learning to count his silences, what the length of them meant, what they cost him. "Come with me," he said. The study again. Same lamp, same desk, same books pulled at wrong angles. He didn't sit down. He went to the window and stood with his back to it and looked at her, and she stayed near the door because she wanted the option of leaving it available even if she didn't intend to use it. "The document is real," he said. She had expected that. It still landed. "Min-jae established that account 2 weeks before our wedding," he said. "I did not know about it." "At all." "At all." She held his gaze. "That's a significant thing to not know." "Yes." "She runs your finances." "Yes." "And she created an account in my name, attached a note that reads like a payoff, and you had no knowledge of it." "That is what I'm telling you." She breathed in through her nose. "Out." "Then explain to me how that's possible. Because from where I'm standing, either you're lying to me, or the woman who runs your organization was operating completely outside your authority, and I don't know which of those is worse." He looked at her steadily. "Neither do I," he said, which was not the answer she'd expected, and the unexpectedness of it made it land harder. "She has operated with significant autonomy for 20 years. He stopped, started again. "I trusted that autonomy within certain limits. I did not know she had decided to redraw those limits." "What was the note supposed to accomplish?" "I don't know yet." "Take a guess." His jaw tightened. "If you had found that document and believed it was sanctioned by me, that I had arranged to buy your silence before we were even married, you would have left, immediately." He paused. "And you would have had grounds to access the trust without any further complication. No marriage, no claims, clean separation with financial security." Avery went still. "She was trying to end it," she said, "before it started." He didn't answer. "She created a document that looked like a payoff. She planted it where I could find it. If I found it and believed it, you would have walked away believing I had treated you as a problem to be managed," he said. "Yes. And I never would have asked you about it." "Probably not." She thought about the note she'd written herself. You're going to want to run. She thought about how close she'd come, in that sitting room with the trust documents, before she'd called Hannah, before she'd gone to the study, how close she'd been to packing a bag instead. She knew about the note I wrote myself, Avery said. Something moved in Ji-hoon's face. She knew I was worried before the wedding, Avery said. She helped create that worry. She knew that if I found the right kind of evidence at the wrong kind of moment. She stopped. Someone sent that photograph to your people tonight. Someone wanted them to think I'd been paid off, that I was compromised. She looked at him. Who knew about that account besides Madame Seo? I'm trying to determine that, he said. Ji-hoon. I'm trying to determine that, he said again. And something in his voice had shifted, gone colder and more specific. The voice she suspected he used when he was not trying to reassure anyone. What I can tell you right now is that 3 of my senior people received that document tonight with a message suggesting that my wife had accepted payment from a rival organization as a condition of the marriage. Avery heard what he was saying. She said, They think I'm a plant. Some of them will. From who? The organization that sent the message is... He stopped, measured. There are people who would benefit from instability within my operation, who have been looking for a point of entry. And I'm the point of entry. He looked at her. You were never supposed to be anything except my wife, he said, and it was the most direct thing he had said to her since the hospital. Not careful, not measured, just flat and true, and sitting in the room between them with nowhere to go. She held it. Where is Madame Seo? She said. Rusem. She was in the formal sitting room. The one Avery had learned was used for meetings, for the organization's business, not for family. The implication of the location was its own kind of message. She was standing when Avery came in, not pacing, just standing, which was different from how she usually occupied a room, and the difference was visible in her shoulders, in the held quality of her posture that was too rigid to be composed. Ji-hoon came in behind Avery and closed the door. Madame Seo looked at Avery first, then at Ji-hoon, then back at Avery. You found the photograph, she said. Someone sent it to me, Avery said, and then to 3 of Ji-hoon's people. A change in Madame Seo's face. Fractional, not what she'd expected. Who sent it? I was hoping you'd know. The older woman looked at Ji-hoon. He said nothing. He was standing 2 feet inside the door with his hands at his sides and his face doing the complete blankness thing, and Avery had learned enough to know that when he looked like that, the stillness was doing a great deal of work. Explain the account, Avery said. Madame Seo looked back at her. She straightened slightly, not defensively, but the way a person does when they have decided to stop managing a situation and simply occupy it. I established it, she said. The money is real, the account is in your name. And the note is mine. Did Ji-hoon know? No. Why? Madame Seo looked at her for a long moment. Because he would not have permitted it. Then explain to me, Avery said, and her voice was very level, the same voice she used with students when she was angry and needed not to show it yet. What you were trying to accomplish. Madame Seo moved to the chair, not the power position, just a chair, and sat down. It was the most human gesture Avery had seen her make. She sat with her hands folded on the table and looked at the surface of it for a moment. I was trying, she said, to give you an exit. Avery stared at her. You were trying to... You were terrified. She looked up. Her voice was not soft. Madame Seo's voice did not do soft, but it was direct in a way it hadn't been before, without the pleasant armor. I had watched you for 4 months. I had watched you come into this world and try to find your footing, and I had watched the fear in you when you thought no one was looking. She paused. I said things to you that were unkind. I said things intended to fracture what you were building with him. I told myself it was for the organization. It was not entirely for the organization. Ji-hoon said from the door. Min-jae. Let her speak, Avery said, without looking away from Madame Seo. The older woman held her gaze. I watched my brother's wife spend 30 years in this life, she said. I watched what it cost her. I watched what it cost their children. I thought... She stopped. Something moved behind her eyes that was more complicated than anything Avery had seen in her face before. I thought that if you had the money, If you had an account with enough to take your art center and your students and your life and go somewhere, this world could not follow you. I thought you would take it. I thought you would leave before the wedding, before it became too difficult to leave. The room was very quiet. You were trying to save me, Avery said. I was trying to give you a choice I did not believe you fully understood you had. By creating a document that looked like a payoff. I did not intend... She stopped. The language of the note was meant to be clear to you and unclear to anyone else. It was meant to look like a private arrangement between us, not like evidence that I was compromised, Avery said. Not like what someone used it as tonight. Madame Sio's hands pressed flat against the table. No, she said. Not like that. Ji-hoon moved from the door. He walked to the table and stood at the end of it and looked at his aunt, and the quality of the look was something Avery had not seen from him directed at anyone before. Not anger exactly, because anger implied loss of control, and he was not losing control. It was colder than anger, more specific. Who else knew about the account? He said. No one, she said. No one in the organization. It was a private... Someone knew, he said. Someone sent it tonight. Someone used it. He paused. Either someone in our organization accessed your private records, or you told someone. Madame Sio's chin came up. I told no one. Then we have a breach. Ji-hoon, we have a breach, he said again, quiet and absolute. And 3 of my people believe my wife was paid to marry me, and someone outside this house made sure of that tonight. He looked at her. Think about who you spoke to, about Avery, about your concerns, about anything that could have touched this. Madame Sio looked at the table. Avery watched her. She watched the older woman's face move through something. Not guilt, exactly, but the specific expression of a person reviewing their history for a mistake they didn't make deliberately and finding it anyway. There was a lawyer, Madame Sio said, who handled the account setup. He is... She stopped. He is someone I have used for private matters for 15 years. Name, Ji-hoon said. She gave it. He was already on his phone before she finished the second syllable. Avery stood in the middle of the room and looked at the woman who had spent months trying to dismantle her marriage out of something that was not malice, or not entirely malice, and felt the particular exhaustion of trying to hold 2 true things at once. That Madame Sio had been unkind. That Madame Sio had been, in her own catastrophically misguided way, trying to offer a door. She said, Did you think I'd go? Madame Sio looked at her. When you set up the account, Avery said, did you actually think I'd take the money and leave? A long pause. I thought you were too intelligent not to, she said finally, and when I didn't. Madame Sio was quiet for a moment. I thought I had underestimated something, she said. I wasn't certain what. Ji-hoon came back to the table. Whatever the phone call had been, it had been brief and had clearly produced information because his face had shifted into something that was not the blankness anymore. It was focused, directed, the expression of a man with a target. The lawyer has not been at his office in 4 days, he said. His assistant says he's traveling. He is not traveling. He looked at Avery. Someone got to him, used what he knew to produce the photograph, sent it tonight. Why tonight? Avery said. Because you went to the art center today, he said. Because someone is watching the house and watching you, and today was the first time you left alone, and... He stopped. And because you coming back from the art center was the first visible sign that you were not going to leave on your own. She understood what he was saying, so they accelerated. They needed you gone before you were settled, he said. Before you were... He looked at her directly. Before you were a real part of this. The sitting room held the 3 of them and the weight of what had been said. Avery looked at Madame Sio, who was sitting with her hands flat on the table and her back straight, and her face doing something it had not done in any of their previous conversations, something that looked, stripped of the armor, very close to afraid. The 3 people who got the document tonight, Avery said to Ji-hoon. How bad is it? He looked at her. One of them will believe me when I explain, he said. One of them will be uncertain. A pause. One of them has already begun making calls. To who? To people who have been waiting for a reason to question my stability. She thought about what Madame Sio had said about his mother, about 30 years in this life, about what it cost. She thought about the account with enough money to take her students and her art center and go somewhere this world couldn't follow. She thought about coming back through those gates tonight. She said, "What do you need from me?" Ji-hoon looked at her. The question seemed to catch him somewhere he hadn't prepared for, and she saw it. Just briefly, just a fracture in the precision, before it closed. "I need you to understand," he said carefully, "that the next few days will be difficult. That there will be people who come into this house who will look at you and see a liability, and I need you to—" He stopped. "To what?" "I need you to decide," he said, "whether you want to be here for that." The room was quiet. Madame Seo was watching her. Ji-hoon was watching her. Outside, somewhere on the perimeter, the security rotation was continuing its ordinary circuit, utterly indifferent. "I went to the center today," Avery said. "I sat at the piano. I played the piece I apparently always play when I'm trying to work something out." She paused. Mira came in. She told me I never rush the tempo. Ji-hoon said nothing. "I am not," Avery said, "a woman who runs from things that are unfinished." She looked at him steadily. "But I need you to understand something too. Tell me. If I stay through this, through whatever the next few days are, I'm not staying because I'm afraid to leave. I'm not staying because I don't have options." She held his gaze. "I'm staying because I'm choosing to, and I need you to know the difference." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I know the difference," he said. "Do you?" "It's why I built the trust," he said. "So I would always know." Madame Seo made a sound. Not a word. Just a small exhaled sound that was either the closest she came to agreement or the closest she came to something she couldn't name in this room with these people. Avery looked at her. "The account," she said. "The one you set up." Madame Seo looked back. "Is it still there?" "Yes." "The money is still accessible?" "Yes." A pause. "It was never—" She stopped. "It was always yours." "I know," Avery said. "That's the point." She looked at Ji-hoon. "Tell me what happens now." He told her. It took 20 minutes, and it was not simple, and by the end of it she understood the shape of the danger more clearly. The rival organization, the leverage they'd found in Madame Seo's private arrangement, the three men who'd received the photograph, the one who was already making calls, the lawyer who had disappeared, the particular kind of structural threat that came not from violence, but from the erosion of trust within a closed system. She understood all of it. What she didn't expect was what came at the end of the 20 minutes, when Ji-hoon's phone went again, and he stepped out to take the call, and she was left alone in the sitting room with Madame Seo. The older woman looked at her. "He will not ask you for help," she said. "He does not ask. It is the thing about him that has always—" She stopped. "He will manage it himself. He will put himself between every sharp edge and everyone around him, and he will manage it himself." "I know," Avery said. "I am telling you because—" Madame Seo paused, looked at the table, looked back up. "Because someone should tell you, since he will not." Avery waited. "The man who is making calls," she said. "His name is Choi Byung-soo. He has been with the organization for 18 years. He was—" She stopped. "He was loyal to Ji-hoon's father. He has been looking for a reason to challenge Ji-hoon's judgment since Ji-hoon took over. And what he received tonight was not just a document." She held Avery's gaze. "He received confirmation of what he has always argued, that Ji-hoon's emotional decisions are the organization's structural weakness. And I am the emotional decision," Avery said. "In his view," Madame Seo said, "yes." Ji-hoon came back into the room. He looked at them both. Whatever the call had been, it had compressed something in his face further. "Choi wants a meeting," he said. "When?" Madame Seo said. "Tomorrow morning." He paused. "He's bringing 2 others." Avery looked at him. "What happens at the meeting?" He looked back at her. His eyes were very dark and very still. "He puts forward a motion to have our marriage reviewed by the organization's council," he said, "on grounds that the marriage represents a security compromise." The room held the words. "Can he do that?" she said. "He can try," Ji-hoon said. "Can he succeed?" A pause that was not long but contained a great deal. "If the 2 men he's bringing agree with him," he said, And if I cannot counter the evidence he has, he stopped. Then yes, he can succeed. Avery looked at the man she had married without remembering it, who had built a legal structure to make sure she could always leave, who had sat in a hospital chair for 7 weeks and learned how she took her tea and the name of every student she'd mentioned, who had fixed a lamp instead of replacing it because it was the one she'd broken. She looked at him in the formal sitting room with the night pressed against the windows, and the organization he had built, and the meeting he was about to walk into, and the motion that would be put against him in the morning. She said, "Then I'll be there." He looked at her. "At the meeting," she said. "I'll be there." "Avery, he wants to argue that I'm a security compromise," she said. "Then argue it to my face." She held his gaze. "I am done being discussed in rooms I'm not in." Ji-hoon was still. Madame Seo said nothing. The lamp on the side table, not the one with the repaired base, a different one, this room's lamp, threw a circle of light across the floor that reached exactly as far as it reached and no further, and outside the circle everything was shadow, and Avery stood in the edge of it and felt the particular clarifying quality of a decision that had already been made before she finished making it. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark of the bedroom with the ceiling doing nothing above her and her mind doing everything, running the same sequence forward and backward. The photograph, the document, the lawyer who had disappeared, the man named Choi Byung-soo who had been waiting 18 years for exactly this kind of opening. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, she stopped trying to sleep and sat up and put her feet on the floor and breathed. The ring on her finger caught the low light from the window. She looked at it for a long time. Then she got up and went to the piano room. She didn't turn the lights on. She sat down in the dark at the bench and put her hands on the keys and didn't play, just felt the cool resistance of them under her palms, the specific weight of each key's potential. Outside, the perimeter lights ran their circuit. Somewhere below, she could hear footsteps. Ji-hoon, probably, moving through the house with the particular quality of a man who had also not slept and was not pretending otherwise. She pressed one key, held it until the sound disappeared completely. Then she began to play. Not the unnamed piece, something older, something her hands knew from further back than any of the lost months. A etude she had learned at 17, technically demanding, the kind of piece that required total focus and left no room in the mind for anything else. Her fingers found it without asking permission, and she let them go, let the music fill the dark room. Let it do the thing music had always done for her, which was to organize the chaos into something that had structure and could therefore be survived. She was 3 minutes in when she became aware of Ji-hoon in the doorway. She didn't stop playing. He didn't speak. He came into the room the way he'd learned to come into it, without announcing himself, finding the chair in the corner, settling into it with the quiet of someone who understood that the music was load-bearing and should not be interrupted. She played for another 10 minutes. When she stopped, the silence was different from the silence before. Fuller, somehow, the way a room feels after it has been used rather than before. She said, "Tell me about Choi." Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. "He was my father's second. When my father died, there was a question of succession. Choi believed it should go differently than it did. He thought he should lead. He thought someone older should lead. He was not wrong that I was young." A pause. "He accepted the outcome. He has been functional, productive, loyal within the limits of his loyalty." "And the limits are you," she said. "The limits are his belief that I make decisions with my personal life that compromise the structure." He paused. "He is not wrong that I have done that." She turned on the bench to look at him. In the dark he was a shape, a silhouette, the broad line of his shoulders against the faint light from the window. "Do you think he's wrong about me?" "I think he is wrong about his conclusions," Ji-hoon said. "I think he has reached them from evidence that was manufactured by people who want exactly this meeting to happen." "But the question underneath the manufactured evidence," she said, "do you think he's wrong about that?" A pause. "No," he said. "I think you are the most significant personal decision I have made in this role. I think it was a risk. I think every person in that room tomorrow will know it was a risk." He looked at her. "I think it was the right one." She held his gaze in the dark. "What time is the meeting?" she said. 9. "Where?" "The conference room on the east side, second floor." She nodded. She turned back to the piano. She put her hands back on the keys. Get some sleep, she said. He didn't move for a moment. Ji-hoon. Yes. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I'll be here at 9. She heard him stand. She heard him move to the door. He paused there. She knew without looking because the quality of the room's attention shifted when he paused. And he said quietly, "The piece you were playing. What about it?" "You used to play it when you were working through something difficult," he said. "You told me once it was the most demanding thing you knew, that it was impossible to think about anything else while you were playing it." "That's still true," she said. "Did it help?" She pressed a chord, soft, just the weight of her hand. "Let it fade." "Yeah," she said. "It helped." She heard him leave. She sat in the dark until the sky outside the window began to change color. Then she went and got dressed for the most important meeting of a life she only half remembered. They arrived early. That was the first thing she noticed. Choi and his 2 men were already in the room when she and Ji-hoon walked in, which meant they had come before the agreed time, which meant it was deliberate. A territorial claim on the space. A small violence of precedence. The conference room was large, serious, a long table with chairs on both sides, windows that looked out on the east garden, morning light coming in flat and without warmth. Choi Byung-soo was sitting at the far end of the table. He was older than she'd expected, early 60s, thick through the chest, with silver hair cut close and a face that had the particular weather density of someone who had spent decades in situations that did not resolve easily. He looked at her when she came in, the way she imagined he looked at everything, without surprise, without performance, just assessment. Beside him were 2 men she did not know. One she recognized from the house, a senior security figure, late 40s, someone she'd seen in the hallway but never been introduced to. The other she had never seen before. Compact, younger, with careful eyes. Madame Seo was already in the room too. She was seated on the near side, separate from Choi's group, her posture its usual impeccability. She looked at Avery when she entered, and the look said several things, none of which could be said out loud. Ji-hoon pulled out the chair to the right of center for Avery without making it conspicuous. She sat. He sat beside her. 2 of his own people took chairs further down the table. Nobody offered pleasantries. This was not a pleasantries meeting. Choi said, "We'll speak Korean." Ji-hoon said, "We'll speak English." The silence that followed was not empty. It was a test, which Ji-hoon had just passed by refusing it. Choi looked at Avery. His English, when he used it, was careful and precise, and accented in a way that suggested he spoke it less often than he understood it. "Mrs. Kang," he said, "I will be direct with you." "Please," she said. "The document received last night was a fabrication," Avery said, "used by a rival organization from materials obtained from a compromised source." She held his gaze. "You know this." Something in Choi's face shifted. Not much. A recalibration. "The origin of the document," he said, "is under investigation. Its existence, however, its existence is the result of a private arrangement made without Ji-hoon's knowledge," Avery said, "by someone who was trying in a misguided way to give me an exit before the wedding." She paused. "That arrangement was then weaponized by people who want this conversation to happen." Choi looked at Ji-hoon. "Your wife speaks for you now." "My wife speaks for herself," Ji-hoon said. His voice was flat and even, as she has always done. The question before this group, Ji-hoon said, "is whether Choi Byung-soo's assessment of a manufactured document supersedes my authority to determine what constitutes a security risk in my own house." He paused. "That is the actual question. I'd like us to be honest about that." Choi's jaw tightened. The 2 men beside him were doing their own assessments. She could feel it, the sweep of their attention moving between Ji-hoon and her, taking inventory. The younger man, the one she didn't know, said, "The account exists." "Yes," Avery said. "Money transferred into your name before the marriage." "Yes." "And you were aware of it." "I found out last night," she said, "the same time everyone else did." He looked at her with the careful eyes. "And we should take your word for that." "You should take the transaction records," she said. "The account was never accessed. Not once. The balance is identical to the initial transfer." She held his gaze. "People who accept money to compromise their position tend to spend it." A short silence. Choi said, "That is not the only concern." Then tell me the other ones, Avery said. Directly, to my face. He looked at her for a long moment. She held it. She had spent 15 years managing rooms full of people who were testing whether she'd look away first, and she had learned a long time ago that the answer was never to look away first. You are not from this world, he said. You have no understanding of its requirements, its loyalties, its costs. He paused. Ji-hoon is a young man who made a decision based on personal feeling rather than structural reasoning. That is a pattern that has consequences. What pattern? Ji-hoon said. His voice had gone to the cold, specific register. Your father, do not, Ji-hoon said. The two words landed like something physical. Do not bring my father into an argument about my wife. The room went very still. Choi looked at him. In the stillness, something was happening between them that was older than this meeting, older than the photograph, older than anything Avery was part of. Two men and the ghost of a third, and 30 years of what it meant to lead something and what it cost. Your father, Choi said carefully, also made decisions from personal feeling. I watched what it cost him. My father, Ji-hoon said, is not here. I am. And what you are doing this morning is using a document produced by our enemies to challenge a decision you have objected to for the past year. The document is the excuse. The objection is what it has always been. He looked at Choi steadily. Say the real thing, Byung-soo. Say it out loud, in this room, with everyone present. A pause. I don't believe, Choi said slowly, that a music teacher from a community arts center has the constitution for what this life requires. Avery said, before Ji-hoon could respond, define constitution. Choi looked at her. I want to know what you mean, she said. Specifically, what is it you think this life requires that I don't have? He looked at her for a long moment. The ability to stay, he said, when things become what they become. I'm here, she said. Now. I'm here now, she said. I woke up in a hospital not knowing my own husband's name, and I did not leave. I found documents that looked like evidence my husband had bought my compliance, and I did not leave. I received a photograph last night from an unknown number designed to make me question everything I had rebuilt in the past several weeks, and I came back through those gates, and I'm sitting in this room. She paused. I don't know what your threshold for staying is, but I'd like to know what else you need. The room was very quiet. The man with the careful eyes was looking at her differently than he had been 30 seconds ago. She noticed it, filed it. Choi said, This is not a performance I am evaluating. No, she said, it's not a performance at all. That's the point. Madame Seo said from her end of the table, the account. Everyone looked at her. She looked at Avery. Tell them. Avery held Madame Seo's gaze for a moment. Then she looked at Choi. The account was established without Ji-hoon's knowledge, she said, by Madame Seo, with the intent of giving me a private means of leaving if I chose to. It was not a payoff. It was not a compromise. It was... She paused. An intervention by someone who was afraid I would be hurt by a life she understood better than I did. She paused again. She was wrong to do it without Ji-hoon's knowledge. She was not wrong that this life has costs. Choi looked at Madame Seo. Something passed between them. Not warmth, but recognition. 20 years of operating in the same structure together. The lawyer, Choi said to Madame Seo, is a problem I take responsibility for, she said. He was in my employ. His exposure of that document was a breach I did not anticipate and cannot fully account for yet. She held Choi's gaze. But I can tell you who used him. And who sent those messages last night? Because in the 8 hours since this began, I have been doing what I have done for 20 years. She paused, following money. The room shifted. Choi said, talk. She talked. For 12 minutes, Madame Seo laid out a financial trail. Transactions, shell accounts, the movement of money through 3 intermediary structures to a name that Ji-hoon clearly recognized because his face did the cold, specific thing again, and one of his own men at the table exhaled sharply through his nose, a name that meant something to everyone in the room except Avery. When Madame Seo finished, the silence had a different quality than the one at the beginning. Choi looked at Ji-hoon. If this is accurate, it's accurate, Ji-hoon said. Then the document was a tool, Ji-hoon said, to produce exactly this meeting, to create internal instability at a moment when he stopped. Something moved in his face. He looked at Avery. She saw it the moment he did. The Arts Center, she said. He looked at her. I went to the Arts Center yesterday, she said. Alone. First time I'd left the estate by myself. She felt the thing assembling in her chest, cold and clear. Someone was watching. Yes. They waited until I came back, until I made it obvious I wasn't going to leave on my own. She held his gaze. So they tried to make me leave. Yes. Because as long as I'm here, she stopped. As long as the marriage is intact, you are not a liability, he said. The opposite. Choi said, explain. Ji-hoon looked at him. The alliance with the Park Network, he said, confirmed 6 months ago, conditional on the marriage holding. He paused. If the marriage is challenged successfully, if it's dissolved, or if the council votes to review it as a security compromise, the alliance fractures, Choi said. The alliance fractures, Ji-hoon said, and they know that, which is why the target last night was not me. He looked at Avery. It was her. The weight of that moved through the room. The man with the careful eyes said, the motion. He looked at Choi. We can't put forward the motion. Choi said nothing. Byung-soo, the man said. If we put forward the motion and it becomes known, we triggered a review based on fabricated evidence. It was not fabricated, Choi said. The account exists. The note was taken out of context and used by an external actor to destabilize this organization, the careful-eyed man said. He looked at Ji-hoon. The motion is withdrawn. Choi's jaw was tight. He looked at Ji-hoon. He looked at Avery. He looked at the table. Withdrawn, he said finally. The word came out like something being set down from a height. Ji-hoon said nothing. He didn't thank him. He didn't acknowledge the concession with anything visible. He simply looked at Choi for a moment and then looked away, which was its own kind of language. Chairs moved, people began to stand. The meeting's formal structure dissolved into the low-register movement of people reconfiguring their understanding of the last 12 hours and what it meant for the next 12. Choi stood. He was moving toward the door when he stopped. He turned and looked at Avery. His face was not soft. It would not do soft, that face. It didn't have the range, but something in it had shifted from the assessment at the beginning to something more like acknowledgement. Mrs. Kang, he said. Mr. Choi, she said. He looked at her for a moment. The Chopin, he said. The girl you teach. Avery went still. My granddaughter, he said. She began lessons 4 years ago. Her teacher... He stopped. Her teacher recommended your center. A pause. She talks about you. Avery stared at him. She said you never rush, he said. She said you told her that the music tells you when it's ready. You don't tell the music. He held her gaze for a moment. I had wondered, he said, what kind of woman Ji-hoon chose. He left. The room emptied in stages until it was Avery and Ji-hoon and Madame Seo, and then Madame Seo stood and said, without looking at either of them, I'll begin the process of tracking the lawyer, and left too. And then it was just the two of them in the conference room with the flat morning light and the east garden visible through the window and the wreckage of the last 12 hours settling around them. Ji-hoon looked at her. She looked at him. She was aware that her hands were shaking, a delayed response, the body catching up to what the mind had been holding at bay for the last hour. She pressed them flat against the table and breathed. You knew, he said, about the alliance. I guessed, she said, in the moment. She breathed out. Was I right? Yes. She nodded, pressed her hands harder against the table. He crossed the room and stood beside her, not touching, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him in the cold-aired conference room. And she thought about 7 weeks of a man sitting in a hospital chair and $47 million in an irrevocable trust and a lamp with a seam in the base. It's not over, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. The name Madame Seo produced. He will try again. A different angle. When? Soon. He paused. He underestimated what happened in this room this morning. He will recalibrate. She looked at her hands on the table. The ring caught the morning light. She said, "Choi's granddaughter. What's her name?" Ji-hoon looked at her. "I don't know." "I do," she said. "She's been in my Tuesday class for 3 years." She lifted her hands from the table. They had mostly stopped shaking. "She has perfect timing," she said. "She never rushes." Something in Ji-hoon's face moved. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lived in the same neighborhood, gone almost before it arrived. "Come with me," he said. She looked at him. "There's something you need to see," he said. "Before this afternoon, before whatever comes next." He held out his hand. Not demanding, not insistent, just available, the way he'd positioned himself by the car door at the hospital, by the door of every room, at every threshold she'd had to cross in the past several weeks. Just there, waiting for her to decide. She took his hand. She felt the particular temperature of his palm against hers, the slight roughness of his knuckles, the specific weight of a hand that had done many things and was now holding something it was careful with. She stood. They left the conference room together, and the morning light moved with them down the hallway, and somewhere behind them the East Garden was doing what gardens do when nobody is watching them, which is to simply continue, season after season, patient as anything alive. He led her down the corridor she hadn't been in before. The East Wing, further back in the house, further from the formal rooms, the public face of the estate. The hallway here was narrower. The walls had photographs, framed, the kind that were hung because they mattered rather than because they looked impressive. She glanced at them as they walked and saw in her peripheral vision the evidence of a life, a boy in different stages of growing up, a woman she thought might be his mother, places she didn't recognize. He stopped at a door at the end of the hallway. He opened it. The room beyond was not large. It was not formal. It had the particular quality of a space that had been used privately and often, a sitting room, small and worn at the edges, with bookshelves that were actually full, and a window that looked out not on the manicured grounds but on the older part of the property, an untended section where the trees grew without instruction. On the bookshelf, between 2 heavy volumes, was a photograph in a plain frame. She crossed to it without being directed. The photograph was of a community arts center. She recognized the sign, the slightly uneven lettering on the second S taken from outside. A woman visible through the window standing at a piano, her back to the camera, her own back. She lifted the frame off the shelf. Behind it, propped against the books, was another photograph, this one taken from inside the center. Better angle. She was at the piano bench, turned sideways, laughing at something. Beside her, just at the edge of the frame, a large hand visible on the corner of the piano. She stood with both photographs and felt the thing she had been waiting to feel since the hospital. Not a memory, something under memory, something the body keeps in a place the mind can't reach. "When was this?" she said. "February," he said, "the night you told me." She turned. He was standing in the doorway of the small room, watching her with the dark, watchful eyes, and she looked at him and understood several things simultaneously. That she was still building a picture from evidence rather than memory, that the picture was becoming very clear, and that the version of herself who had written "Don't Run" had known something that this version of herself was only now arriving at, that sometimes the evidence is enough, that you don't always get the memory back, that choosing a second time is not less real than choosing the first time. She held the photographs and looked at him, and the morning light came through the window of the small, worn room. And outside, somewhere in the estate's larger structure, a phone was ringing. His phone, or someone's phone. The next thing assembling itself at the edge of the horizon, the recalibrated threat that was already in motion. And she looked at the photograph of her own back through a window, and the large hand at the edge of the frame, and she felt not the memory, but the truth of it. And she opened her mouth to say something, and the phone got louder, and Ji-hoon's expression changed in the specific way it changed when the world he ran was making a demand he couldn't defer, and he said very quietly, "I have to go," she said. He didn't move immediately. He looked at her with the photographs in her hands in the small room at the end of the East Wing hallway. "I'll be here," she said. "Go." He went. She stood alone in his room with the photographs and the untended trees through the window, and the sound of his footsteps going back down the hallway. And she thought about what Madame Seo had said. He will put himself between every sharp edge and everyone around him. And she thought about a man named Choi Byung-soo, whose granddaughter had perfect timing, and she thought about the name Madame So had produced in the conference room. The name that had made Ji-hoon's face go cold and specific and had made one of his own men exhale sharply. She didn't know that name. She needed to. She set the photographs back carefully, the laughing one first, propped against the books, and then the one of her back through the window, in the plain frame, back on the shelf. She went to find Madame Seo. She found her in the study, at the desk, with 3 phones and a laptop, and the particular posture of a woman in the middle of doing the thing she was actually for. She looked up when Avery came in. "The name you said in the meeting," Avery said. "Tell me about him." Madame So looked at her for a moment. Then she pulled out a chair. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to take a while." Avery sat. Outside the study window, the city was doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. And somewhere in it, the man whose name had been said in the conference room was already recalibrating, already selecting his next angle, already moving toward the thing that he had decided he wanted, which was the fracture of everything that had been built in this house. Madame So began to speak, and Avery listened with the particular focused stillness of a woman who had learned, in the last several weeks, the difference between being in a room where decisions were made about her, and being the person in the room who made them. Madame Seo talked for 40 minutes. She talked without the armor, without the pleasant, dangerous surface, or the careful management of implication. She talked the way a person talks when they have decided that accuracy matters more than presentation, and what came out was specific and cold and more frightening than anything Avery had assembled on her own. The man's name was Lim Dae-won, 61 years old, ran a financial network that operated across 4 countries through structures that looked, on the surface, like legitimate investment holdings. He had been in conflict with Ji-hoon's organization for 3 years, not open conflict, nothing that could be named or confronted directly, but the kind of sustained lateral pressure that worked by erosion, finding fault lines and applying weight, waiting for cracks. He was patient, Madame Seo said. He identified the marriage as a vulnerability 18 months ago, before the wedding, when Ji-hoon first made his intentions known internally. And he's been building toward this since then, Avery said. He arranged the lawyer's placement in my private network 8 months ago, she said. I did not know. I have used that man for 15 years and I did not... She stopped. The stop was not dramatic. It was the particular halt of someone who does not excuse themselves easily and is not going to start now. I did not adequately verify his continued loyalty. That's how they got the document. Yes. He had access to the account records. He had access to my private correspondence about it. She looked at the laptop screen. When you left the estate alone yesterday, Lim's people read it as an indication that the marriage was fracturing naturally. They moved up their timeline. They sent the photograph to you and to the 3 organization members simultaneously, hoping you would leave before you could speak to Ji-hoon, and hoping the internal challenge would follow while Ji-hoon was destabilized. Avery thought about the car, the dark road, her hands in her lap. They were close, she said. Yes, Madame Seo said. She looked at Avery directly. You came back. I came back. They looked at each other across the desk. What does he do next? Avery said. Madame Seo turned the laptop screen so Avery could see it. A financial diagram, complex, branching structures with names and amounts at the nodes. The Park Network Alliance, she said, pointing to a cluster on the right side. The condition was the marriage. But the alliance has a secondary condition that most people in this organization do not know about. Her finger moved to a different node. A joint holding, established 3 months ago. If the alliance fractures, the holding reverts to a neutral trustee for liquidation. She paused. Lim Dae-won is the neutral trustee. Ho Okshate. Boss. Avery stared at the screen. He doesn't just benefit from the alliance fracturing, she said. He profits from it directly. Significantly, Madame Seo said. Enough to restructure his entire network. Enough to move from lateral pressure to direct competition. She closed the laptop. He will not stop with the photograph. The next move will be more direct. How direct? Madame Seo looked at her. This is the part, she said carefully, where I would normally advise you to allow Ji-hoon to manage what comes next. But, Avery said, But Ji-hoon does not know about the secondary condition, she said. I discovered it in the last 2 hours, and if he goes into whatever Lim does next without knowing, then he's operating on incomplete information. Yes. Avery stood up. Where is he? His office, 3rd floor. She was already moving to the door when Madame Seo said her name. She stopped, turned. The older woman was sitting at the desk with her hands folded and her posture its usual precision, but her face was doing the thing Avery had seen only twice before. The thing under the armor, the human thing that the armor existed to protect. I was wrong, Madame Seo said, about what you were, about what you were capable of. A pause. I want you to know that I understand that. Avery looked at her. I know, she said. We can talk about the rest of it later. She went. Ji-hoon was not in his office. He was in the hallway, outside it, on the phone, and he saw her face when she came around the corner and ended the call mid-sentence. What? He said. The Park Alliance has a secondary condition, she said. Lim Dae-won is named as the neutral trustee for the joint holding if the alliance fractures. He profits directly from the dissolution. Ji-hoon went very still. Madame Seo found it in the last 2 hours, she said, in the account structures. How much? He said. She told him the number Madame Seo had shown her. His jaw shifted. She watched him do the rapid internal accounting of what that number meant in terms of network restructuring, competitive positioning, what Lim could build with it. He can't wait, Ji-hoon said. The holding liquidates on a 90-day trigger from alliance fracture. He needs this resolved in... He's already moving, Avery said. Madame Seo thinks the next move is more direct. Ji-hoon looked at her. How direct? Before she could answer, one of his security people appeared at the end of the hallway, moving fast and with the particular quality of movement that meant the information they were carrying was time-sensitive. Sir, he stopped 2 feet away. We have a situation at the Arts Center. Everything in the hallway went cold. Avery heard her own heartbeat. What situation? Ji-hoon said. 2 men entered 20 minutes ago. They're still inside. The security man glanced at Avery, then back at Ji-hoon. No one has been harmed. They appear to be waiting. For what? Ji-hoon said. The security man looked at Avery again. For Mrs. Kang? He said. Ji-hoon tried to stop her from going. He tried once, directly, in the hallway, with his hand on her arm and his voice stripped of everything except the raw particular urgency of a man who has identified a threat, and every trained instinct he possesses is telling him to put himself between it and the person he is afraid for. This is what he wants, he said. He wants you there. He wants you out of this house and on his ground. I know, she said. Avery, I know. She looked at him. And there are 43 students and 4 staff members in that building right now, on a Tuesday afternoon. She held his gaze. I'm going. He held her arm for 3 more seconds. She watched him make the decision, not to stop her, but to change the shape of it, to transform the instinct from prevent to protect. He let go. My people are already positioned, he said. You go in, you stay visible. You don't go anywhere you can't be seen from the entrance. His voice was controlled and specific, the operational register. You have your phone. Yes. Anything changes? I call, she said. I know. He looked at her for a moment. In the 3rd floor hallway, with the afternoon light coming through the window at the end and the security staff arranging themselves with the quiet efficiency of long practice, he looked at her with the dark, watchful eyes, and she saw what was behind them clearly now. Not just the watchfulness, but what the watchfulness was protecting. The thing he did not say because he was not a man who said things until he was certain the ground was solid enough to hold them. She said, I'll come back. I know, he said. She went. The Arts Center looked the same. It always looked the same. That was the thing about it. The sign with the uneven S, the narrow windows, the brick that had taken 30 years to develop its particular color. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at it and felt the same thing she'd felt the day before. The recognition that lived underneath memory, the bone-deep familiarity of a place that had shaped her. She went in. Carla was at the desk. Her face was very controlled, which meant she was frightened and was working hard not to show it for the sake of the students visible through the practice room window behind her. They're in the main hall, Carla said very quietly. They said they'd wait. Is everyone? Everyone is fine. The kids are in the practice rooms. I didn't tell them anything. Avery put her hand briefly on Carla's arm. Keep them there, she said. Whatever you hear, keep them in the practice rooms. She walked down the hallway to the main hall. The two men were sitting in the audience chairs, third row, with the particular relaxed posture of people who have decided that appearing comfortable is its own form of intimidation. She had never seen either of them before. They were not large in any dramatic way. No visible weapons, nothing theatrical. Just men in good clothes who had decided to be somewhere they hadn't been invited. One of them stood when she came in. He was the one who was going to do the talking. She could read it in the way the other one stayed seated, in the slight forward arrangement of the standing man's posture. Mrs. Kang, he said. This is a children's arts center, she said. Whatever your business is, it doesn't belong here. He smiled. It was not an unpleasant smile. It was a professional one, the kind that had nothing to do with how the person was feeling. We're here to deliver a message, he said, from Mr. Lim. Then deliver it and leave. He reached into his jacket and produced a document. He set it on the chair beside him rather than handing it to her. Another small territorial move, making her come to it. She walked forward and picked it up. She read it. It was an offer, structured as a legal document, formatted cleanly, but an offer, a purchase of her interest in the Arts Center Trust, a number that was significantly larger than the trust's value, and a condition, her signature on a separate document, attached, which was a statement to the effect that the establishment of the trust had been coercive, that she had felt pressured into the marriage, that she was signing voluntarily and independently of any influence from Ji-hoon's organization. She understood exactly what the statement would do in the hands of Lim Dae-won. It would be the fracture, documented, in her handwriting. She set the papers back on the chair. No, she said. The man's professional smile stayed exactly where it was. Mrs. Kang, the offer is... I heard the offer, she said. No? Mr. Lim is prepared to be generous. The value of the trust plus... You're in a room with a piano and 40 children 50 feet away, she said. And you're trying to use those children as the leverage you don't quite have the nerve to say you're using. She looked at him steadily. That's what being in this building instead of somewhere else means. You wanted me to feel it, the proximity. She picked up the document again and held it. So I'm going to tell you directly. This building and every person in it is under the protection of this trust, which is irrevocable, and no signature I put on any document today changes that. The lawyers who structured the trust were very specific about what could and could not be altered. You can verify that. She held his gaze. And then you can leave. The professional smile didn't waver. You understand that your refusal has consequences, she said. Yes, I've been understanding that for the last several weeks. She looked at him. Is there anything else? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the second man, still seated, who gave a very small, almost imperceptible nod. The standing man picked up the document from her hand. He returned it to his jacket. He straightened. Mr. Lim will be in touch, he said. Mr. Lim can contact my husband's legal team, she said, like a person. They left. She stood in the main hall and listened to their footsteps down the hallway and the front door, and then she stood in the silence of the empty performance space with her hands at her sides and breathed through the shaking that she hadn't allowed herself while they were in the room. From the stage, the piano waited with its worn keys and its slightly imperfect action. She went to it. She sat down. She didn't play. She just put her hands on the keys and breathed until the shaking stopped. Behind her, the practice room doors opened and Mira appeared in the doorway of the hall, violin case in hand, with the solemn expression that Avery was beginning to understand was this child's version of asking if someone needed company without asking directly. Were those men bad guys? Mira said. They were men making a bad choice, Avery said. Mira considered that. Are you okay? I'm going to be. Mira came in and sat in the front row of audience chairs. She opened her violin case with the careful habitual movements of long practice and lifted the instrument out and set it on her knee. She said, Can I play something while you're thinking? Avery looked at her. Yeah, she said. Go ahead. Mira put the violin to her chin. She played the Chopin, the piece she'd been learning, the one she used to rush. And she didn't rush it. She played it at exactly the right tempo, with the particular kind of imperfect perfection that children achieve when they have finally stopped fighting a piece and let it move through them instead. Avery sat at the piano and listened. She called Ji-hoon when the piece was done. She told him everything that had happened in 3 sentences. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "You're all right." "I'm all right," she said. I'll take the car you have outside already," she said. "I know it's there. I saw Park when I came in." A pause. "I was going to say I'll send dinner," he said. "You haven't eaten." She looked at the piano keys. "Okay," she said. "Come home," he said. She held the phone and felt those 2 words land in the particular place where they were true. "Yeah," she said. "I'm coming." The thing about Lim Dae-won was that he was patient until he wasn't. Madame Seo had understood that. She had been watching his financial structures for the 2 hours since she found the secondary condition. And when Avery came back from the arts center and sat down with her again in the study, she laid out what she had found in the additional time with the specific, exhausted clarity of someone who has been doing very fast and very precise work and has arrived somewhere she didn't expect. "He overextended," she said. The timeline he set for the holding liquidation, 90 days, was based on an assumption that the alliance would fracture within the first week of the campaign against you. She turned the laptop. He borrowed against the expected liquidation proceeds, significantly. Avery stared at the screen. He was counting on this working. He was counting on you leaving, she said, or being removed, within a week. She paused. It has been 3 weeks since the photograph was first prepared. He is already behind his own schedule. She looked at Avery. And this afternoon, you refused his document in front of his own men. Which means he knows the direct approach failed, Avery said. Which means, Madame Seo said, that he is now in a position where he needs to move faster and more visibly than he intended, and visible moves can be countered. Ji-hoon came in then, without knocking, with 2 of his senior people and the focused operational quality he'd had in the hallway before the conference room, the version of him that ran things. He looked at the laptop screen. He looked at Madame Seo. "Talk," he said. She talked. What followed was 3 hours that Avery spent mostly listening in the study as Ji-hoon and Madame Seo and 2 legal representatives who arrived at 7 in the evening worked through the specific structural mechanics of Lim's position and how to use its weaknesses against him. She was not decorative in those 3 hours. She asked questions when she had them. She understood more of it than she had expected to, partly because Madame Seo answered her questions without condescension, and partly because the last several weeks had been a rapid and brutal education in how these structures worked. At 9:15, Ji-hoon made a call. She didn't hear the specifics, but she heard the tone and the duration, and when he came back into the study, his face had the particular quality of someone who has placed a piece precisely where it needs to go. "The Park Network has been informed of the secondary condition," he said, "and Lim's borrowing position." He sat down. He looked tired, which was the first time she had seen that on him. Not depleted, but carrying the particular weight of a long day at the end of a long several weeks. They are not pleased to learn they were used as a mechanism in his financial strategy. "Will they hold the alliance?" one of the legal representatives asked. "They will hold it," Ji-hoon said, "with modifications to the trustee arrangement." He paused. "Lim will be removed as neutral trustee by end of week. His claim to the holding dissolves with it." Madame Seo said, "and his borrowed position." "Becomes his problem," Ji-hoon said. The room was quiet. Avery said, "Is that enough to stop him?" Ji-hoon looked at her. "It removes his financial incentive," he said, "and exposes that his campaign against us was driven by personal profit rather than legitimate concern. That changes how his allies perceive him." A pause. "It doesn't make him disappear, but it makes him significantly less capable of doing this again." She nodded. "It's enough," he said. "For now." She knew what "for now" meant in his world. She was learning to hold it, not as a threat or a limitation, but as the honest shape of the life they were in. Nothing was permanently resolved. Things were managed, contained, redirected. The work was continuous and costly, and never entirely done. She could live with that. She was beginning to understand that she had chosen to live with that. The legal representatives left at 10. Madame Seo gathered her things. She paused at the study door and looked at the two of them, at Ji-hoon at the desk and Avery in the chair beside it. And she did not say anything, but the look she gave them before she left contained something that her face had not previously offered. Something that was, stripped of its complexity, simply that she had been wrong about what this was. The door closed. The study was quiet. The lamp with the repaired base threw its circle of light. Outside the window, the estate's perimeter was running its ordinary circuit, the security doing what it always did, the night doing what it always did. Ji-hoon set down the pen he'd been holding and looked at her. "You went into that building," he said. "Yes." "With two of his men inside?" "Yes." He looked at the desk. "I want to tell you that it was reckless," he said. "I want to say you should have waited, let my people go first." "But," she said. "But there were children in the practice rooms," he said, "and you were the only person who could walk into that room and have it mean what it needed to mean." He looked up. "You knew that." "I knew that," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" She thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said. "Hungry, still. I don't think the dinner you mentioned actually materialized." "It materialized. It's in the kitchen. I forgot to tell you." She almost laughed. The almost of it surprised her, coming up from somewhere underneath the exhaustion, the relief, the accumulated weight of the day. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth did the thing it sometimes did. "Come on," he said. They ate in the kitchen at 10:30 at night, cold by then, the dinner that had been arranged and forgotten. But she was hungry enough that it didn't matter. And the ordinariness of it, the two of them at the kitchen table with plates and the bad overhead light and the perimeter doing its circuit outside the window, was so specific and so real that she felt it in her chest the same way she'd felt Mira's playing. The particular gravity of a small true thing. She said, "When did you know that you wanted to marry me?" He looked at her. He thought about it the way he thought about everything. Not performing the thinking, actually doing it. "The third time I came to the center," he said. "You were on the phone with the landlord again. Different call, same argument, and a kid came in and showed you a drawing of, I don't know what it was, a shape. And you kept arguing with the landlord, and you were looking at the drawing and you told the kid it was incredible without breaking the sentence." He paused. "You were doing 4 things at once, and you were fully present for all of them. I had never seen anyone do that." She looked at the plate in front of her. "That's a strange thing to fall in love with." "It's the truest thing I ever saw someone do," he said. "Being completely there, even when everything around them was falling apart." She thought about the hospital ceiling, the ring she didn't recognize, the man asleep in the chair who turned out to be the person who'd learned every student's name. "I still don't remember it," she said. "Any of it. The wedding, the 8 months before, the 3 weeks after." She looked at him. "I don't know if I ever will." "I know," he said. "Does that—" She stopped, started again. "Does it matter to you that the person sitting here doesn't have any of that?" He looked at her steadily. "The person sitting here," he said, "walked into a building with 2 of Lim's men inside and told them no. The person sitting here sat through a 3-hour strategy meeting and asked the right questions. The person sitting here," he paused, "came back through the gates." "You keep mentioning the gates," she said. "Because you didn't have to," he said. "Every single time. You didn't have to come back, and every time you did, it was a choice." He looked at the table. "The person in the hospital who didn't know my name has become someone I also know. Someone I—" He stopped. "The memories are mine," he said finally. "I'll keep them. What matters is who you are now." She held that. Outside, somewhere on the property, an owl, rare enough in the city's outskirts to be worth noticing, made its single repeated sound and then went silent. She said, "I wrote a note to myself." "I know. It said don't run." She looked at him. "I think I wrote it because I knew I was going to find something that looked wrong, something that was going to look exactly like a reason to leave." She paused. "I think I knew that about him, about you, that you were going to do something that looked like control and wasn't. And I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to tell the difference." He was very still. I could tell the difference, she said. It took me a minute, but I could. His hands on the table were very still. She reached across and put her hand over his. He looked at her hand on his. He looked up at her. The dark, watchful eyes, and underneath the watchfulness, the thing that had been there since the hospital, patient, certain, waiting for the ground to be solid enough. She said, I need to tell you something. Tell me, he said. I'm not in love with a memory, she said. I don't have the memory. What I have is the last several weeks, the lamp, the piano room, the tea. She looked at him. The way you stood outside my hospital room door and didn't come in until I asked. She paused. I'm in love with what I can see, which is a man who uses his power to make sure I never have to be afraid of his power. She held his gaze. That's not a small thing. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, Avery. Yeah, I have been, he stopped. Since the hospital, I have been trying to. He stopped again, and she understood now that when he did this, the stopping, it wasn't evasion, it was precision. He was not a man who said important things carelessly. I didn't know how to be in the same room as someone I loved who didn't remember me, he said. I didn't know what I was allowed to feel about it. Whether I was allowed to. He stopped again. Whether grieving it was appropriate when you were the one who had lost it. She looked at him. You lost it too, she said. What we had before. Yes. That's allowed, she said. You're allowed to grieve that. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, almost too small to see, and then it was gone, closed back up, except that it had been there, and she had seen it, and she thought that would matter for a long time. I know, he said. She didn't move her hand from his. A month passed. Then another. The thing about a life is that it does not hold still for anyone to examine it. It moves forward continuously regardless of whether the person living it is ready. And the trick, the thing Avery was learning or relearning or learning for what felt like the first time, was not to be ready. It was to be present. Fully, specifically present, even when everything around you was still settling. Lim Dae-won's network sustained the damage Madame Seo had predicted. His removal as trustee and the exposure of his financial position did not destroy him, but it restructured him, pushed him back several years in his ambitions, rearranged his alliances, made the kind of aggressive move he'd attempted against Ji-hoon significantly more difficult to execute for the foreseeable future. He was not gone, but he was no longer the pressing weight at the edge of every decision. Choi Byung-soo remained in his role. The morning after the conference room, he sent a brief formal message acknowledging the outcome and expressing no further objection to the marriage. It was the closest thing to an apology his particular formation would allow, and Ji-hoon received it in the spirit it was offered, which was to say he acknowledged it and moved on. His granddaughter continued her Tuesday lessons. She brought her timing down to something approaching perfect. Madame Seo's relationship with Avery became something that didn't have a clean name. Not warm, exactly. Not uncomplicated, but honest in a way that their early interactions had not been, with a directness that Avery found she preferred to the pleasant, dangerous version. They had coffee once a week in the sitting room off the library, and the conversations were sometimes difficult and sometimes surprisingly not, and Avery thought that was probably the most accurate version of what they were going to be. The lawyer was found. That resolution was handled in a world Avery understood only in outline, and she chose not to ask for more detail than she was given. That too was part of learning the shape of this life, knowing which rooms she needed to be in and which rooms she trusted Ji-hoon to manage. And the memories did not come back, not in any complete way. There were flashes, more of them now, triggered by the things the doctor had said they would be triggered by. A piece of music that would produce a sudden bright specific image, gone before she could hold it. The smell of the coffee cart outside the subway station that Hana had described, which once produced a sensation so physical she'd had to stop walking. Ji-hoon's voice at a particular register when he was not performing composure, that sometimes landed in a place in her body that recognized it before her mind could catch up. She stopped chasing them. That was the change, the thing that had shifted without her noticing until it was already shifted. She stopped turning toward the locked room and rattling the handle. She lived in what she had. It turned out to be enough. She asked him to come to the art center. Not for a meeting, not for a strategy conversation. She called him on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the limb situation resolved, and said, "Come to the center on Saturday, there's a recital. Mira is performing." He said, "What time?" She said, 2 o'clock. He said, "I'll be there." He sat in the back, as he apparently always had. She didn't see him come in. She was behind the stage with 6 students doing the particular kind of last-minute preparation that involves a lot of deep breathing and one kid who couldn't find their bow. But when she came out into the audience for the performance, she saw him immediately. 3rd row from the back, dark jacket, the particular quality of stillness that she could pick out now in any room. He didn't look out of place. That was the thing she noticed, the thing she hadn't expected. In this room with its patched ceiling and its folding chairs and its audience of parents with phones recording in landscape mode, he did not look like an intrusion. He looked like someone who had decided to be somewhere and was fully there. Mira performed 4th. She walked onto the stage with the solemn expression and the careful posture of a child who has rehearsed being composed, and she played the Chopin, and she did not rush a single note. When she finished, she stood and gave the small formal bow she'd practiced and looked into the audience and found her grandfather in the 3rd row. Choi Byung-soo was clapping, a normal amount. After the recital, in the main hall with the folding chairs being rearranged and children still in their performance clothes running between adult legs, Avery found Ji-hoon at the edge of the room. She came to stand beside him. "She was good," he said. "She was great," Avery said. He looked at her. She looked at the hall, the people in it, the imperfect ceiling, the piano on the stage with its worn keys. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. "I stood in front of my students last week," she said, "and one of them asked me who taught me to play, and I started to say my first teacher's name, and then I stopped. Because the person who actually taught me the most about music is standing next to me right now." She held his gaze. "You taught me to slow down, to stop rushing the thing that wasn't ready yet." A pause. "I learned that from watching you." He looked at her. "From the way you waited," she said. "In the hospital, in every room, the way you never pushed." She held his gaze. "That's what good timing looks like. I didn't know that before." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out something small. He held it in his palm and looked at it, then held it out to her. It was his wedding ring. She looked at it, then at him. "I want to feel you choose me," he said. Quiet. No performance in it. The same precision he gave to everything that mattered. "Not because you were already wearing the ring, because you decide." She looked at the ring in his palm. She thought about a woman who had sat down 6 months ago and been afraid enough to write a warning to herself and brave enough to go through with it anyway. She thought about the piano room built 3 months before the wedding, and the tea and the thermos and the lamp with the seam and the photograph of her own back through a window. She thought about coming back through the gates. Every time. Every single time. She picked up the ring. She took his left hand. She felt the particular temperature of it, the slight roughness, the weight. She slid the ring back onto his finger. He looked at it, then at her. Around them, the hall continued its after-recital motion. Children and parents, and Carla directing the folding chair operation with her usual efficient energy, and Mira somewhere in the crowd still holding her violin case, and the ceiling with its one visible patch that had been there for 6 years and would probably be there for 6 more. Ji-hoon looked at Avery in the middle of all of it. She looked back. "Yes," she said. Not loudly, just to him, in the noise and the ordinary chaos of a Tuesday recital at a community art center with a patched ceiling. Still, yes. His hand closed around hers. Not hard, just certain. Outside, the city made its continuous sound. The art center made its particular sounds. Children, music, the old floor under folding chairs, the last notes of someone practicing in the back room even now, even in the middle of everything. Because that was the thing about this place. It never stopped. The music never stopped. And Avery Quinn, who had woken up not knowing her own name, who had rebuilt herself from evidence rather than memory, who had walked into rooms she was afraid of and come back through gates she didn't have to come back through. Avery Quinn stood in the place that had always been hers and held the hand of the man she had chosen twice and felt, with the specific and irreplaceable weight of a thing that is genuinely true, that she did not need the memory of the first yes. This one was enough. This one she would keep. Bone. A year later, the Arts Center roof had one new patch beside the old one. Same contractor. Same visible seam. Carla had wanted to redo the whole section, and Avery had said leave the original one. She had not explained why, and Carla had not asked. Mira performed at the spring recital and rushed the tempo slightly in the second movement, and afterward told Avery that she'd done it on purpose, for variation, and Avery told her that was the most creative excuse she'd ever heard a student give. And Mira smiled the way she smiled when she thought she'd gotten away with something. Jihoon attended, third row from the back, normal amount of clapping. He still sometimes made the tea badly in the mornings, not from lack of trying, but from some fundamental incompatibility with the process that Avery had given up trying to diagnose. She made it herself most mornings. On the mornings she didn't, she drank whatever he brought her and did not comment on it, and he watched her drink it with the expression of a man who suspects he is being managed but cannot prove it. Madame Seo came for coffee on Wednesdays now. She had, on one occasion, brought a plant, which she set down on the table without explanation and left without mentioning it. The plant was still alive. Avery watered it on Fridays. The locked room stayed locked. Some mornings, Avery woke and felt the absence of it with the dull ache of something that would not heal completely. She had learned to leave the ache where it was. It was honest about what it was, a loss, a real one. And she didn't need it to be otherwise. What she had was the ring on her finger and the weight of a second yes that no accident could take. What she had was a man who made terrible tea and fixed lamps, and had once held a bucket in a leaking hallway, and decided, on the basis of a woman who didn't stop to be impressed by him, that she was worth everything he'd restructured his understanding of his own life to build. What she had was this: a patched ceiling, a piano in the key of slightly imperfect, a life that was hers all the way through. She sat at the bench after everyone had gone, and the hall was empty, and put her hands on the keys and played the unnamed piece, the one she played when she was working through something difficult. And this time, playing it, she realized she wasn't working through anything. She was just playing. Her hands knew the piece. They had always known it. She played it all the way to the end,